Welcome, everyone, to a very special edition of TeaTime. We're talking to Preach, all the way from every other MMO, or quite a lot of them anyway.
Because ArenaNet's biggest strength that I've seen encounter-wise is scale and animations. They're the best at it. They beat FF14, they smash World of Warcraft because they're horrendous. And you have this dragon, and as soon as it popped up, like similar with the Zero encounter in the raid, so it's like, what in the hell? And it's so smooth, and it's done so well. And then it just gets squashed, and it's like,
And this is a reality. If you don't provide ways for players to essentially set standards for their group, where, you know, we want you to be experienced, we want you to be playing this particular build and applying this particular boon, and if you don't have stuff like that, the players will do it, but worse.
yeah, really, the most impressive boss that I've seen, which was Zero, is beautiful and really well designed. Like, that could pass easily in FF14's raids. It would never work in a WoW raid, but in FF14, the Zero boss would be astronomically good. People would love that fight so much, and that's incredible considering how old it is. What, 2016, I think? If that came out in the next FF14 patch, nobody would be mad. That is cool. The bosses I didn't like are like the escort mission with Glenna. Like, starting your raid with an escort mission is a criminal offense. Like, that person should be in jail.
Welcome, everyone, to a very special edition of TeaTime. Let's talk about Guild Wars 2. We're talking to Preach, all the way from every other MMO, or quite a lot of them anyway. So, to start things off, actually, what are you doing here? Right? Explain yourself. Like, what are you doing in Guild Wars 2?
I could tell. Why am I in Guild Wars 2? I'll tell you why I'm here first. Is before we started playing Guild Wars 2, one of my team is a huge fan of yours, Bex. So we were talking about it in our team meeting. Is like, we were thinking about this project MMO. I was against it for years because I got so burned on World of Warcraft that when my team was like, you should really try out Final Fantasy, Guild Wars 2, Elder Scrolls, the prospect of playing another MMO made me feel physically ill. I'm not saying that to be exaggerating. I was like, absolutely not. That's like 50, 60, 100, 200, 300 hours. I just don't want to do that anymore, and we risk becoming another one gaming again. And I'd just done that for like 9 years of playing one game, making content in one game. I'm not going to do that. And it took, I think, I bet my audience knows better than me, but a year and a half before I was like, okay, maybe we can. I miss MMOs. There was a reason I played one for 9 years straight. I miss MMOs. So we came up with Project MMO, and immediately Guild Wars 2 was on the list. And Bex, one of our team members, says, you should talk to MightyTeapot before you even start. Because he will fill you in on what to do, what to go into. But I like doing it blind. So I was like, okay, well, that's great, but, you know, I don't want to do that right now. Let's hold that to the line. And now we're here. Now we're doing this. But I'm in Guild Wars 2 because of Final Fantasy 14, which I played as it was a sub goal. We did a charity subathon, and my team put it in against my wishes. I said, I do not want to play Final Fantasy 14. It's full of weebs. I hate anime. I don't want to touch that game ever. Ended up having the most incredible time, and that's when we were like, okay, we should expand this a little bit, because not only that, I'm a super nerd on the mechanics and the technicalities of the game, the construction of the game, and of video games in general. And FF14 has a lot of systems that I was like, why was this not in WoW? Like, this is such a good idea. Why is it not over there? It made no sense. So then it was like, well, maybe Guild Wars 2 has those kinds of things, and Destiny 2, and Elder Scrolls, and Star Wars: The Old Republic. Let's try these things out. Let's jump in. So we did Project MMO, which we set a simple goal is finish the current raid. Of course, I did not know that there is no current raid in Guild Wars 2, so to speak. I assumed that every expansion came with a new raid. Duh, that's how WoW does it. That's how FF14 does it. So my goal when we set out the mission, I could see my team Pepe laughing like, yeah, that's really going to work out super well. So I was like, okay, we'll clear the current raid of all these MMOs and see how it goes in. And then, of course, I logged into Guild Wars 2, and I was like, so we hit level 60. I was like, so where's the raid? He's like, there is no raid. And everyone started laughing at me. I was like, what? There is no raid in this game? And they're like, well, there is, but they didn't launch with one. And I was like, why? This is an MMO. These are certain check boxes that you expect to be ticked, right? When you think of an MMO coming out, it's like, well, of course there's raids. Yeah, it was a whole surprising experience, the whole thing, but an enjoyable one. Like I've fallen madly in love with Guild Wars 2. I love it. It's great.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
that's fine here.
yeah, that's very, very interesting actually, because I think this is one of the things that Guild Wars 2 is often criticized for, especially internally, is almost not presenting to potential players what it actually has to offer. You know, I get very similar things all the time, like, oh, Guild Wars 2 has raids? I had no idea. Like, or I thought this was a PvP game. Oh, what? This game has PvE? That's crazy. So I'm very curious, actually, on what your expectations were for the game. You kind of mentioned raids there, but what was your initial impression? What had you heard about the game outside of the Guild Wars 2 sphere? Because MMOs, we love our bubbles, right? Like, we know everything. Okay, how could anyone not know what Guild Wars 2 has in it? Like, come on. How is that possible?
Yeah, for sure. I can tell you the day it came out, my wife bought Guild Wars 2. And I looked at it, I glanced at it for about 3 seconds and said, oh, it's another WoW clone. It's another tab target, skill button, skill bar game. And if you remember, I don't know if you remember this period, but this was the time when every company in the world, kind of like what happened with Battle Royale, was trying to cash in on World of Warcraft success. And it was like every couple of months, there was the new WoW killer MMO was coming. It was Aeon Online, it was Conan, it was Warhammer, Wildstar. All these games were just flooding out all the time, and Guild Wars 2 was in that mix. And so it was like, Guild Wars 2 is coming out, and it had all these fancy cutscenes, but they don't mean anything to me anymore. Like, seeing a fancy visual in a trailer doesn't mean a hell of a lot. And then they showed the gameplay, and I was like, it's another tab target skill bar MMO, whatever. And I just literally put it to the side. I think it also launched at the same time as Mists of Pandaria for World of Warcraft, and I was loving that. So I lost no interest. And my wife played it for a few days, kept saying she had a really good time, but she's also a noob. So I couldn't take her opinion seriously, and none of my friends were playing either. And going into an MMO without that immediate structure of friends, like everybody loves, say, Path of Exile, you all jump in together and you all enjoy the league, and then you can drop out again. And with MMOs, it's, if you're seasoned in MMO, you want to jump in with some friends so you can do dungeons and stuff together. So my knowledge of Guild Wars 2 was limited to it exists, and it looks like WoW, and I don't care. And their twist on it, I think, was world versus world. I think that was one thing I knew about, was the twist to Guild Wars 2 was they were going to have world versus world, these enormous PvP battles are going to be good. I compared that mentally incorrectly to Alterac Valley and hated that. I was like, that sounds, well, shit. So I'm not going to bother with large scale tab targeting PvP because it just turns into a cluster of AoEs all the time and it's not particularly fun. So I skipped over it and learned nothing, literally zero of Guild Wars 2 until the Dragonflight announcement when they did the dragon riding cutscene for World of Warcraft. And everyone went, oh, this is just Guild Wars 2. And that's when it sort of re-popped up on my radar. So from the launch day, literally the launch week, until that Dragonflight announcement, Guild Wars 2 had not been mentioned in any of my circles until that point. And that's when it popped back up on the radar. And I was like, I don't know what they've been doing in that game. And then it cycles us round to my friends saying, well, you should try it out and see what you think and go in. So that's everything. I didn't know anything about it, but I assumed certain things. I assumed dungeons, obviously. I assumed raids, because they would have raids. They had PvP, which I compared to Battle. Everything was looked through a World of Warcraft lens, unquestionably. If someone announces a feature at that time, I don't look that way anymore. But at that time, I would have just equated it immediately to something in WoW and gone that road with it. But that's the stuff I expected, but I don't think I ever saw an announcement of a feature that was anything that grabbed me offhand. Probably because I equated it straight back to WoW. And I was like, I already have that here. I don't need to go somewhere else to get that and re-level, right? Because I hate leveling in MMOs. I can't stand leveling in MMOs because I want to get to the end game, which has been a big surprise in Guild Wars 2, is that doesn't work that way. You level is done, and then somewhat, I didn't know the mastery system existed, so I capped level 60 and was like, I'm done leveling, and I could just enjoy all the expansions. Yeah. And then immediately it was like, but what if there was more to level? I was like, oh, you slimy gits. There's something hiding. But it makes sense. You need some sort of evolution of your character for expansion.
Yeah, this is actually a really interesting thing, because the game actually used to be even less so in the progression direction. In fact, a lot of the things that happened early on in the game were kind of a reaction to players not knowing what to do. For example, when the game launched, there wasn't ascended gear. You got exotic gear, and that was it. And it was very easy to get as well. You would get it almost very, very fast in your character progression. And they added all of these new concepts and stuff like the mastery system, because a huge problem that Guild Wars 2 had is that people didn't get it, right? They came into the game, again, with your kind of traditional MMO perspective, and it was like, wait, hang on a minute. What am I doing? I've got best in slot gear now, and what am I supposed to do? I don't get it. And as a result of this, ArenaNet very quickly thought, oh no, we need to give them something to grind. Let's make that real quick. And then that's when Ascended Gear kind of came into play. And even essentially kind of a quote-unquote infinite dungeon system, where the dungeon would kind of infinitely level up, kind of, right? With the original iteration of fractals and stuff like that. And then, of course, that eventually went into Heart of Thorns, where they added the mastery system, which, by the way, on launch was way grindier. Actually,
really?
They really nerfed it really hard, actually, in terms of the amount of experience you required to actually unlock the mastery. They nerfed it hard.
Good.
And actually, the same with elite specializations. You almost needed double the amount of hero points in order to unlock an elite specialization. It was 400 on launch. They took it down to 250 afterwards. So they really wanted to give a lot of players a lot of stuff to chew on. And I think a big part of that was because the game, I think a lot of MMOs, they give you a sense of direction, a sense of purpose. And Guild Wars 2 doesn't do that. I'm actually curious what you think of this now, because now I think it does it a little bit more. But back then on launch, it was nothing, right? It just said, right, here's the game. Right, go free, right? Do your thing, press some buttons, have fun. And that caused a lot of problems.
Yeah, I think back to the day one video I made, because obviously Bex keeps notes of what we're going through. And I remember I finished sort of day one or two that I played Guild Wars 2. And I think my conclusion was, I have no real thing to do at all. But that's the strength of the game. Like, I recognize that. It's like, what they were trying to do was, instead of putting you on guide rails and saying, go here, do everything, go here, do everything, go here, do everything. This time they were saying, do what you want. It's an open world. You could do anything you want. If you want to spend 7 hours in the first zone, that's fine. If you want to go and do a little bit of every zone, that's fine too. And you won't be punished. We won't hold you back for doing that. And I thought, oh, I get it. I get this. Like, they want you to just play as you like, was the approach they seem to be going for. But I could totally see that a lot of players would come in like, where is my carrot? What am I chasing here? Like, what is the game trying to teach me to do? I've just got these big maps, which obviously I compared to like Ubisoft maps, where they're just loads of stuff dotted all over the map. What am I supposed to be doing? Should I go here? Should I finish the zone? Should I complete it? Should I just go somewhere else? The story's telling me I can go somewhere else. Should I? I haven't finished everything here. I don't know. That confusion could be very much upsetting for some players who like structure, who want to be kind of told what to do next and go on it. So I could see a lot of players being a little lost with this, because I think that's how the hearts came into it, because people just didn't know what to do. So they were like, okay, we'll put these heart things in for just simple, repeatable quests, but they'll cause people to have something to do and give them a sort of, explore this part of the map. Explore this part of the map. There's a heart down there. Maybe you should go and see what's going on down there. But gentle. I think that was a very gentle approach, rather than quest hubs, right? Which is what they usually use in other MMOs, is very specific hubs of quests that delve you out into different areas. You come back, you turn everything in, and then it says, right, go to the next one, do the same again, and just repeat it all over. This different approach, I liked it. I got it straight away, but I could absolutely see a lot of players being like, I don't know what to do. Which is how I felt about Destiny 2, because that's how their game currently works. It's like, I don't know what to do. I have no idea. The game isn't pushing me to do anything, but it's not the same open experience as Guild Wars 2. I have no clue where to go. And that's tough. That's tough for a lot of players to try and muddle it out on a solo player idea. That would suck.
Yeah, this is the thing that when people ask me, what do you like the most about Guild Wars? So I always say it's the freedom, right? If I want to play PvP all day, 24/7, I can do that. If I want to do the same with world versus world, awesome, great, do it. Raids, do it. Fractals, do it. Awesome. You can just do this all the time. And this is something I found incredibly refreshing in an MMO, is that it did have this wide open sandbox experience. And definitely in the leveling, I still recall really enjoying the leveling process of just kind of wandering around finding stuff, like just random things all over the place, right? I know you're not a big fan of jumping puzzles, but I thought this is awesome, right? This is so cool. It's a platform in my MMO. This is sick. I love it. Like all this kind of stuff, the exploration element is really, really exciting. And there's one thing about the carrot that I want to circle back to, actually, because this is a really big issue that always comes up in conversations about Guild Wars 2. Guild Wars 2 kind of did have the big carrot at the start of the game, but the problem was that everything was kind of weirdly obfuscated, right? Because, of course, you had legendary weapons. That was supposed to be the big carrot, and it still is to this day, of course. But the thing is, the entire thing is kind of hidden and packaged away inside the Mystic Forge, right? It's not exactly obvious that it even exists, right?
I don't know what that thing is yet.
Yeah,
I have lots of things that mention the Mystic Forge.
Yeah.
No clue.
Exactly, yeah. And what if I told you that basically all endgame rewards that can be obtained through gameplay essentially go through that system?
I can believe it. Like, I was so... As somebody who doesn't care about gear at all, the fact that, like you said earlier, is that I acquired all my pretty much essentially best gear, or close to, at the end, with the gold I had made while leveling. It was like I went to the auction house and just bought it all. And I was like, awesome. This was great for me. And then the messages came in. It's like, well, you can do the legendary grind. It'll take you X amount of months. I'm like, no, thanks. No, but the Mystic Forge, yeah, I've seen it in Lion's Arch, I think. A big swirly on the floor. I have lots of items that mention the Mystic Forge and things, but I haven't touched it yet. It's not been on my radar as something to do. Or has it really mentioned it's a relevant importance? I certainly haven't had a quest or something to go and do an introduction to it, right? Which is how it would ordinarily be structured in MMO, is like, you should probably go and check out the Mystic Forge and make some, I don't know if it's a crafting thing or whatever, or, you know, something like, you should go and make something simple in there to show you how this works. I've had nothing like that in the game.
Yeah, I mean, it's not much of it. It's not a spoiler at all. It's essentially crafting, right? Like, you put stuff in and you get stuff out. And essentially that's the source of how you go about crafting legendaries, all types of legendaries in there, right? There'll be some quests attached to that, basically. But I think what's super interesting is that the game was really set against the idea of quests, right? And the idea that, oh, you know, here's a list of stuff that you go and do. And because they were so opposed to this, it's almost like backfired really horribly, because now the game does an incredibly poor job of communicating kind of how to get things done. Almost all of it is into the achievements panel, essentially, right? Which is just an absolute mess, like a complete clown fiesta of a million things you got to click through, and a whole bunch of different menus, and you've got to find the recipes. And honestly, like, even I don't know the recipes. I look at the wiki. I don't know what's going on. I don't think anyone
wiki seems
truly
to be a bit
knows
of a the wiki, I've been told, is and I've used the wiki now to get my Ascended Sword, is kind of like the use the wiki for everything.
Yeah.
Just type it into the wiki and somebody's made it out so you can
Yes.
follow it, because it's not in game technically, but the wiki is linked through the game. So it kind of is to go and figure out what you need to do with these things. Because you brought up a good point there. The inventory system is horrendous in Guild Wars 2. Like, I absolutely detest it, as many people know, because I kept hold of everything that looked important. I held on to everything that looked important because all these items looked important. It was like, it's trophies. A trophy has an essence of permanence about it. Like, if I earn a trophy, I feel like that's something I should probably hold on to, right? If I get a trophy, I should probably hold on to that. But not just trophies. My inventory was just constantly filling up with random items that mention the Mystic Forge. Somebody somewhere would care, you know, obscure vague messages, such as somebody somewhere would be really interested in this item. Like, oh, that's probably important. It probably leads to something like a mystery quest or something along those lines. So I'll keep that. And I could just see the amount of, like, oh my God, happening in my chat while I was doing that. Because I ended up just completely overstuffed with things that I refuse to get rid of because they seem important. But I don't know what they do. I have no idea, and I didn't know the wiki existed. And if it started to get really annoying because I filled my bank, I think on day 2. My bank was completely full of stuff that seemed important. Like it gave an impression of being important, and it's not. It's not important. It's not simply labeled like this is gray. You can sell that. This, we go through the color system in nearly every video game, not just MMOs. You've got white, you've got green, blue, orange, and so on. So you kind of get an idea of the relevance and of importance of these items, but there isn't any of that in Guild Wars 2. It's just like a bit of a tooltip that comes with it. Figure it out. But there's just something appealing to that. If one thing I will say is, like, in my discourse about Guild Wars 2, as I always tell people, is I haven't had the benefit of playing this for an extended period of time before a patch is coming, which is a big difference to how people play MMOs, right? I basically have new content every day. I'm doing Path of Fire, then I've got raids, then I've got fractals, and then I've got all the strikes and things like that. I've got something new to do every day. What I haven't played is where you've done the base stuff, and now you can just play the game. And then that's when I would probably dig into all these items in my inventory and sort of wiki them and figure out what the hell's going on. I haven't got that benefit. I finish Heart of Thorns, I go straight into the raids, I go straight into Path of Fire. So that's something I'm missing, where this stuff would probably make more sense to me as to what's going on. I would figure it out for myself, but I do not have that benefit, and I'm not going to be able to get that benefit. I can't force myself to, like, right, we're going to play the base game now for 5 months to figure stuff out before we start Heart of Thorns. I'm not going to do that, obviously. That wouldn't make any sense. But that stuff is missing, where you kind of get into the minutiae a little bit.
And I think that's a very interesting thing about Guild Wars 2 as well, is that there's so much of it, right? All of the game essentially stays relevant, and all of it's linear as well, right? You're essentially going through this massive 10-year story arc of the game. So there's a lot of catching up to do if you want to have that full experience of playing through Guild Wars 2 from start to finish. It's a very, very meaty game, especially if you go through all of the quote-unquote side content like raids and stuff. There's a lot to do before you get to the current position where the game exists, which is very interesting. And, the continuous story fact means that, yeah, sure, you could jump ahead, but you're going to go, wait, who are all these characters? Like, what's all going on here? And that's a bit inevitable with any MMO, I think, but it's like almost like more the case in Guild Wars 2 because of the nature of the way the story is set up, right? They wanted to tell this massive grand story arc, with the game, and as a result of that, there's a huge amount for new players to go through, and I think this is true of the systems as well. I think horizontal progression is very much a double-edged sword. Anytime ArenaNet add a new system to the game, that is there forever, right? It's not like in something like World of Warcraft where you have a new system for an expansion and then it might go away after that and be replaced by another one. And you're kind of, you can wipe the slate clean and go again. In Guild Wars 2, it's all here forever. And that means
there is a middle ground.
Yeah.
Let's just put that out there. There is a middle ground. That's okay. There doesn't need to be one way or the other, which is because we hate the other way in World of Warcraft. That's one of the reasons people left. It's like, why are you reinventing the wheel every goddamn expansion, man? I've learned this now, and then it's gone.
And now it's gone. It's something entirely new. Again. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Like, it's definitely no fun to have, particularly if it's a system you enjoy, right? And then it's just deleted from the game, essentially, right? Like, that's not what you want. But I think there definitely is a bit of it can be a very overwhelming experience for new players to be introduced to all of these systems that have kind of piled up, especially if they haven't all been maintained super well either, which is a little bit the case in Guild Wars 2, I think sometimes. Yeah, the bugs, they can appear. They can materialize out of nowhere sometimes.
I've had some serious bugs. Not too many serious ones. I've had ones that keep resetting the story with no checkpoint, which is really infuriating if you're like 20 minutes in and it's like, oh, and it bugged, so start again. Usually it's voice lines that bug out all the time, so my character just starts, I've got a female non, but suddenly they're a male human, and they're just talking, and I'm like, who's talking? Like, literally, because I usually don't have my own chat bubble on screen, because I'm trying to create a more cinematic view as best I can. and it doesn't work out. And I'm like, guys talking. Who is that? And I'm like, physically, people have seen me look around the room with my camera. It's like, who's talking right now? Is there another character sneaking in or something like that? But no, it's just me. It's all bugged out, and eventually it'll get fixed. But I'd be interested. Is there any systems? Because obviously, I'm only up to Path of Fire on my little journey. What systems have I integrated with you would think haven't been maintained particularly well? Any that I've encountered thus far?
It's mostly the content itself. Like, a lot of content typically has issues that don't really keep pace with the game. Like, for example, I think a lot of encounter design in some of the earlier parts of the game hasn't aged super well. Some of the bosses, they die very, very quickly sometimes. Right? Yeah, that's kind of a classic one. Yeah. And that stuff like adding mounts to some of the old maps, I think it can be super difficult as a new player. A lot of players who have been playing for years and years and years, they already have all of the mounts, particularly the flying mounts, right? And old content wasn't really designed with that in mind, and that can definitely be quite frustrating, I think, as a new player, because I mean, people are going to just leave you in the dust pretty much a lot of the time.
Yeah, the outdoor module account was horrible. I literally didn't even get credit for being there. And they killed it in 2 minutes. I had to do the outdoor module encounter twice just to get credit for it. And I couldn't take part in going to the other platforms because people were flying there so quickly, killing it, that by the time I got there, I had to stop because I had the glider, that I was just chasing them around. So it made sense for me to just stand still and wait for them to do it, to take part in the encounter. And then I watched a video, I'm not sure if it was one of yours or somebody's, where that fight used to take like 20, 25 minutes. And now it's 4 minutes. And it's so grand and epic in scale, and then it just gets clobbered.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have to say, I was definitely very disappointed by the experience that you had there, because I certainly remember that moment myself, and it should be fantastic, right? Like, for when you see that for the first time, you think, wow, this is rather impressive, like, wow, ain't it pretty good? And yeah, I think it's almost a shame that unfortunately you don't even really see all the mechanics of the fight, to be honest, right? It doesn't really exist anymore, unfortunately, which is a bit rough. It's definitely a little bit unfortunate.
I could disable flying there, because I do understand that this needs to be farmable, and making a 25-minute encounter on that needs to be farmed is not fun for your regular players. I totally get that as well. Especially if you're doing it like every hour, a couple of hours that it respawns or whatever. It's like, okay, this is kind of a real drag. This is like a 3-hour commitment every time I want to do this. That's not fun either. So there's a middle ground to be found there. Just disabling flying, I think, would give more balls to the fight. Instead of people just zipping around and finishing it off. The DPS is going to creep. Nothing you can really do about that. So allow that aspect so it speeds the fight up, but also allow people to take part in it who don't have... I don't know when you get flying mounts, and I don't want to know. Same as boats. I don't know whether it's Path of Fire. I don't know whether it's End of Dragons or whenever that comes into the game. But people playing through your game for the first time do not have it, because I didn't have it, and I still don't have access to it. So a little bit of managing there could definitely go a long way to make it as grand as it is, because ArenaNet's biggest strength that I've seen encounter-wise is scale and animations. They're the best at it. They beat FF14. They smash World of Warcraft because that's horrendous. And you have this dragon, and as soon as it popped up, like similar with the Zero encounter in the raid, so it's like, what in the hell? And it's so smooth, and it's done so well. And then it just gets squashed. And it's like, there's a blue balls that's coming with it, which is just not particularly fun.
While we're on the topic, if you had to guess, how much do you think the power level has crept since the launch of Heart of Thorns from then to now?
I have a couple of questions for you on this.
Oh,
because,
okay. Yeah, sure.
But I think this might come up later in our discussion.
Yeah.
Is boons. I'm still not fully clear on how they work, but I know that seemingly they almost triple your damage output.
Oh, yeah.
Which is... I have thoughts about that. But I honestly don't know, because... My seeming impression now, and I haven't explored enough of the game to know the answer to this, is that when I go to a new expansion like Heart of Thorns, which I finished now, and I go to Bloodstone Fen, there's a vendor there that has the Ascendancy trinkets. But I've got some Ascendancy gear now. I've got like 4 pieces or something. And it's a tiny DPS increase, but mainly it adds fractal agony resistance that you can slot into it. So I only notice a very tiny power increase. And my masteries that I've got so far are not DPS increase masteries. They're utility is what I would put them in, right? They're using bouncy shrooms, they're using your mount abilities, things like that. That's what I play with so far. So I honestly couldn't guess unless at some point, because I bought the Berserker gear literally as I capped my character, got to level 18 and then bought it. Has that been buffed in some way? Or is there DPS buffs coming from class buffs that have caused this skew in power? I'm not sure what the source would be.
So yeah, it's mostly from class balance, right? And there's another thing as well. The oh man, I'm almost going to sound like a bit of an elitist here, but the game has been made easier as well. So here's an interesting number, and actually, just correct me if I'm completely unhinged here. I was actually looking at some of the stuff on Warcraft logs, right? And it seems that if you take like a really good player in World of Warcraft, they might be doing double damage compared to a pretty average player. Does that sound, is that about correct?
Not anymore. I mean, that would have to be a pretty horrendous player to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. Like, to a horrendous player, sure. They're just not pressing their buttons properly.
Okay.
But for the most part, a lot of the WoW classes are somewhat whack-a-mole. You know, if it's an important button to press, it'll kind of light up and tell you to press it, essentially. Not all of them are that way by any means. I'm not trying to generalize here, but it's kind of the case that you should expect a good player who's a 99th percentile player to be exceptional, but an average player should be able to hit 70%.
Yeah, 70%.
Right? Something right.
Okay. So, and by the way, this is actually from ArenaNet. This is from one of the previous game directors. That number in Guild Wars 2 is 10 times. So now, a not super great player will do 10 times less damage than a highly proficient player.
Interesting.
And this is like a big problem, right? Because it's super hard to balance the game around that. Like, how do you balance, you know, a raid boss or a story boss or open world when you have that kind of range in player effectiveness? So kind of like some of the performance increases in players have come from they made the game a little bit more accessible to play, but also things in general have become stronger overall as well.
Right. So I guess that brings us to, again, I'm not surprised by that, actually, based on what I'd seen when we did the browsing on my class, because when I try to go as blind as possible. So I chose Revenant. I didn't know it was an expansion class. I had no idea. It just sounded fun to me. But I assumed how to play it on what would make sense to me. So I was constantly swapping weapons. So as soon as my weapon skills were on cooldown, I'd swap to another weapon to use its cooldowns, swapping back, and vice versa with my legends as well. And then when I read into it, it's like, yeah, you don't do that. Like, I was, you know, I don't know what the DPS difference between how I was playing it and how, you know, there wasn't a scale there. But what I was seeing is like, oh, actually, it's way simpler than that. You just maintain uptime kind of on your big DPS buff and just swing away for the most part. You don't even use all your skills. You keep it relatively simple. But my initial impression was way off, as I was doing all sorts of stuff to try and seemingly what makes sense. If I've got a powerful skill with my dual swords, I should want to use that ability on cooldown, right? That would make sense to me, where it was like, no, you just stick with this one, and then your other one can be like a utility slot, like I use a staff now for CC break and things like that. But the boon system, I had no idea how powerful that thing was. And when we killed a lot of the raid bosses, and I think you were in the chat for a few of the raid bosses, the big thing that people pointed out to us afterwards, because we did it blind, we figured it out how we would kill it. We came back, it's like, yeah, you'd spent like maybe 10 times longer than we would killing this boss. And you also did mechanics that if we see that in like a pug, we would leave that pug, right? Because that pug is trash. If you are seeing that mechanic, your pug is garbage. And where for us, like, you know, we're taking other blind players who have no clue either. And to us, it makes sense. This is our DPS. This is what we put out. We're all kind of trying our hardest. We're all matching the mechanics. And then we watch the videos of how people kill it. And we watch your guide videos. It's like Demos. You killed that boss in what, like 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes, which I think was a 15-minute encounter for us, something like that. And it was like, yeah, you just go down and kill everything, and then you come back up and you just murder the boss, and you're done. And we were like, what? Like, this is nothing how we did. What the hell? This is crazy. Like, and then other bosses that we've been really whacking away on for quite some time and having to really map out is like 50% Slothosaur, for example. It's got spores here every 10 seconds. We had to like get a boss mod going and all that. And then we watch the kill of it, and it's like, no, you just pull it to the middle, you kill it before it can do anything. And I think that's the problem ArenaNet probably faces with what you're saying there. Is like, you field a team of players who are doing 10 times less damage than another team. How is this relatable? And also, does it create, and you could tell me this, in the community, a very high level of elitist attitude of, you are doing 50%, 40%, 30%, 20%, 10% of your class's potential damage, because you haven't looked into everything, you haven't researched it or whatever, you're just blinded out of the community, right? I mean, it's that you are useless to us, because we know damage meters exist in Guild Wars 2. I think they're legal, they're fine. But once you show up and the damage meter is putting out that level of performance, it's like, you're out. Like, that's it, you're gone.
It's a really interesting question, and you know what? Not really, not exactly. People do tend to over-fixate on damage a little bit, but I actually wouldn't say that the Guild Wars 2 community actually suffers from a great degree of elitism, to be honest, in this regard when it comes to DPS. I will actually push back, because a lot of people would say this about the Guild Wars 2 community, but I'll tell you a little secret. If you join a raid group and you don't do super hot, honestly, people actually don't care that much. It depends on the content, right? Like, if it's a harder encounter, people are going to look at you a bit funny, for sure. But you know what? If you join some of the easier stuff, the more entry-level stuff, at the end of the day, not really, to be honest. People are just going to get it done, and they'll give you a little bit of a boost, right? There obviously are some bad actors, and obviously, there are people who engage with DPS meters in an asshole way, right? That's inevitable, unfortunately, with these types of things. But I wouldn't actually say that it's a very serious issue within the community. I think the issue kind of comes from the other direction even. And that's like, oh, look at all these noobs, they're the problem. No, I think it's just that players have difficulty measuring their performance and how well they're doing, and they don't know what's good, right? The game is not super transparent with this, and I almost want to steer the conversation towards this now, actually, because what you said about boons is absolutely fascinating, actually, or not fascinating, it's important. The game, I think it would be fair to say, doesn't communicate stuff like this super well. It's not immediately obvious how strong these effects are, and I'd say a lot of the game mechanics in general, you kind of have to dive in, right? If you want to figure out how it all works and really get in there and try and pick it apart, because it's not going to be immediately obvious to you. How good is 30 power on a stack of might? How good is that? Good question.
No idea.
Right? How good is that, right? Like, what does that mean? You have to do a lot of experimentation, or, of course, look it up, right? To actually figure out some of the stuff. And I think that that's kind of where the issue comes from. It's not that, oh, everyone in the Guild Wars 2 player is a complete noob scrub lord. It's more like players have difficulty, understandably so, in determining how the game works, right? And it turns out that boons are how the game works, right? If you want to kill that boss, in a good kill time, right? Boons are how you do that. And actually, one thing that I found very interesting about your playthrough, if you recall Old Lion's Court, your first day of Old Lion's Court, or first session rather, of Old Lion's Court, the really big difference between day 1 and day 2 is that your boons were a lot better on day 2.
Oh, that was the strike, right?
Yeah, the strike mission. Yeah, the first strike mission. And on day 1, I was watching. I was like, oh man, this is going to be rough. Because by the way, that strike mission is a bit of a pug slayer, actually, for the reason that we're describing here. It can hit you pretty hard if you don't have solid boon support and punish you very aggressively. But when you came back, the composition had changed up a little bit. The boon up time was there, and yeah, he crushed it, right? As a result,
through chance. By the way, it was just by whoever was available who hadn't done it. Yeah, it's so strange to see this boon system still live in 2023.
Oh,
Yeah,
Interesting.
for me, because I look
Okay.
at like the 3 games I'm relatively knowledgeable about. So on World of Warcraft, they tried a long time for bring the player, not the class. And one thing I universally agree with, you should feel stronger in a group, that in an MMO.
Mm-hmm.
That I think that is a really fundamental thing that should happen. If you're going to group up with other players in a raid environment, you should feel stronger in some way. That's great. But then World of Warcraft tried to bring the player, not the class, because it ended up class stacking endlessly because certain classes were more powerful than others, and blah, 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 blah. And that didn't work out for them. And they've had to backtrack that now. It's like, okay, yeah, there are some classes that are just flat out better here, but that's the nature of the beast with having class diversity. Do what you want. We'll try and keep it relatively balanced. Final Fantasy XIV went in a different direction again. They try and balance absolutely everything. Obviously, they don't have anywhere near as complicated a system as WoW or Guild Wars 2, because they don't have the talent system. You don't have them in Final Fantasy XIV. Every class has a base amount of spells, and you know that a scholar here has the same spells as the scholar here, and also there's not that much gear diversity. Therefore, we assume you're going to have this power and this power, and we can balance pretty effectively around that as close as possible. But they want class diversity as well, so you get stronger not repeating the same class in the group. Bring anybody you want, but ideally you want 10 different classes or 8 different classes in that group and you'll get benefits to that. Good ones, not breaking ones, but good ones. And if you're a savage raider, you're doing the highest tier of content, you ideally want that. But in normal, it doesn't particularly matter. Then I came to Guild Wars 2 and noticed, and certainly we notice it now as our knowledge has grown, is when we were like, okay, who can come here? We've obviously got a little bit of a list of blind players who've kept themselves blind to come in. And immediately now, they're respecing for boons. And I hate that. But they're so powerful that I worry that people are playing specs and setups they actually don't particularly enjoy, but they're providing buffs and things that are so strong and so class. And it's certainly that you do 2 subgroups. So I want Might and Alacrity in Group 1, and I want Might and Alacrity in Group 2, which means I've now, of the 10 players I've got, and this is like the 2 I care about, but I'm sure there's other boons, I now have to sort of, not force, because people do it willingly because they know how strong it is, make people play these specs. And then I'm also in a position where I provide nothing. So I just like do it. I don't ask people to do it. They do it out of choice, but they also are not playing exactly what they want to play because of this system. And I think on the numbers I looked at, and perhaps you've got better figures for me, the idea that I could do a third of my potential DPS pressing the same buttons, depending on whether these other people are in the group who are responsible for 66% of my damage output, I really find disgusting. And I think so far, so much I enjoyed Guild Wars 2, that aspect of the raiding has really disappointed me. In that, okay, my personal performance is so relative to whether or not this person is stood next to me or even close to me. Because one of the things of raid style that we've had to change is in Guild Wars 2, you tend to want to get people as close as kind of possible because it has a dramatic effect. Whereas our traditional raid mechanic values is, oh, you're getting this debuff like hand kiting, then go and stand as far away as humanly possible. Or go and get it out of the group. And so things like that. But now it's like, actually, you kind of want to configure things, and we've adapted to it because it's the Guild Wars 2 raid style, but we're adapting to a system that feels very antiquated to me. Is that, yes, you should still feel stronger in a group. I should not be doing a third or potentially less damage because Gary or Teapot didn't turn up that night and he's our Alacrity guy. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, yeah.
It's too strong, in my opinion. It's way too strong. And it really disappointed me a little bit. Is like, okay, not only are we having to do class setups for the raid, but we're also kind of having to do it twice with each subgroup as well. And that's something I don't dig. We're adapting to it. It is the way it is. It's not something I'd be like raging about, but it is the most disappointing aspect I've seen of Guild Wars 2 raiding.
Yeah, I think that's actually a common complaint. I think people in the chat or kind of like the veterans are going to go, what are you talking about, mate? But actually, yeah, I think that actually is one of the things that does kind of rub people a little bit the wrong way, or at least it's weird to a lot of players, prospective players, to Guild Wars 2. Because, yeah, if you don't have those boons, your effectiveness is significantly lower. And of course, not just your offensive potential, your defensive potential as well. Healers, in fact, are actually the most powerful role in Guild Wars 2 in PvE. Supports. They are absolutely insane how powerful a healer build is. And I do think ArenaNet tried a little bit, and you picked up this on this very early in your raid journey with the kind of Trinity, right? They tried to address this by packaging.
Yeah, they started to bend.
Yeah, they tried to package a lot of it into the healer, right? As much as they could. And now they've done the same thing with offensive boons, with other boons as well. So for example, a current setup for a raid might look like one healer that applies quickness or alacrity. Then you have a DPS that applies quickness or alacrity, and you're the other one, so you have both, right?
Yeah.
And then you have 3 DPS after that. So it's kind of 4 DPS, one of which applies boons while basically doing the same thing as the other guys, right? While DPSing. And then you have your healer, which is, often your tank as well, your traditional, I'm going to get the green numbers going, love to see it, all that kind of stuff. So I think they tried to nudge it in that direction. And that's significantly changed, by the way, since the launch of Heart of Thorns. It was not like this very much in the same way. It was a lot less. It was, the whole no Trinity thing? That was a lot more true on the launch of Heart of Thorns in the very
so limiting. I see why it went away. If I think of how do you design a raid boss, and I mean I've sat and talked with a lot of raid design encounters, encounter designers. It's like, how do you design a boss that works without the tank healer meta for an MMO? And it's so limiting. And I kind of accept it because we found it in the first strike, right? It was like, oh, if I stand closest to the boss, I become the tank. Interesting. And then it was like, oh, actually, there is kind of healing going on. And if we stay together, I could do my dwarf thing and reduce all our damage and things like that. And I was like, right. So it was kind of like the leveling thing. It's like you can see where they were hardlining it, and then it doesn't work, which is to their favor. I don't think they needed to shoot themselves in the foot by not bending that rule a little bit. And it works out fine now.
Yeah, I just for a bit of context, and this is maybe something that I want to dive into in a little bit more depth when we actually talk about just the raiding experience and almost the history of raiding in Guild Wars 2. On the launch of Heart of Thorns, Chronomancer, which is an elite specialization from Mesmer, was the only build in the game that could apply quickness or alacrity, and in fact, it applied both. And alacrity was a lot stronger than it is now. So obviously this was also, funny enough, it was also more or less the only thing that could tank super well. Well, that's not strictly true, but it was the absolute shoe-in for what you wanted tanking as well. There was also there was one heal build that you would play, specifically Druid from Ranger, right? Everything else is a bit, right? And then the DPS is also a bit of a clown fiesta as well, to be honest, in terms of what was actually good or not. The game had some very serious, I guess, kind of design issues, or they had a lot of difficulty adapting the game to work in that raid context, and particularly because of how strong some of the unique effects were, right? If you wanted quickness and alacrity, you had to have a chrono, right? If you wanted healing, usually you kind of had to have a druid. Oh, but wait, there's more. If you wanted might, you had to have warriors. So basically 6 slots of your raid comp was basically locked in.
Yeah,
right.
It's a limited raid space as well. You've only got the 10 slots to play with.
Yeah, the variety was not super good on the launch of Heart of Thorns.
I can imagine. That's why I think, and that's what kind of leads me into that thought process. It's fine to miss a certain buff, right? You can do all the content FF14 without a shield healer. You could do it. It's not great, but it's fine. You could do all the WoW stuff without a mage with 10% intellect missing. It's fine. It's when it's your personal performance, it gets me when it's okay, it's dramatically worse.
Yeah.
And therefore doing it without it is kind of just being a dick. Right? That's kind of where I lie in it. It's this is just a touch too much for me. I like to be responsible for my performance.
Yeah.
That's where my mindset is. It's I like to be responsible for that, not whether X and Y is shown up.
Yeah, to an extent, it's almost, you have a little bit less autonomy to an extent, because you are heavily reliant on on other people around you. And that is a bit of an interesting thing, because in a lot of ways, Guild Wars 2 was built like that from the ground up. Like, this is almost not almost. This is actually a deliberate design choice that ArenaNet has made. The game has kind of always been like that to an extent. It's always been about players working together to make each other significantly stronger. Like, back in the day, you would blast fire fields. You'd put down a fire field and use all your finishers in it to give each other 25 stacks of might, right, for example. And that was like a huge DPS increase that you would do this, and you'd work together. And it was the same with healing, because back in the core game, there weren't really heal specs. You would drop down a water field, and everyone would use their combo finisher skills to heal each other, right, as opposed to having a healer. It was almost more extreme. Well, it wasn't almost. It was more that direction at the start of the game. So this was the way that they intended it. And of course, it's hard to, they'd have to fundamentally change the game to alter that at this point, of course.
Yeah, for sure. Which I guess has led to some of the balancing issues you brought up there. Is 15 minutes versus 3 minutes to a boss kill is dramatic.
Yeah.
Right. Even though we had a great time, like we had a fantastic time. But it's something I want to look into more, because when you say 25 stacks of might, that doesn't equate to a translation to me in terms of percentages or anything yet. Because I have some spells that give me boons and it's an AoE circle. So the more mobs I drop it on, the more boons I get. But then everybody just goes, dude, it's 3 might. I'm like, I don't really know what that means yet. But like, if it's, that doesn't. You don't need to worry. You don't need to be worrying about your 3 might, Peppy. You go about your day, give you a little pat on the back, and send you on your way. But I was surprised to see that, and it's something I haven't seen for a very long time, I guess, is what surprised me about it. And I'm wondering, when I'm looking at like the boss kill videos you've done and other people have done, is like, wow, are we all just like pressing the wrong buttons all the time, like universally as a group? Are we all just pressing the wrong buttons? And it's like, it's boon up time. And like you said in that strike, the second day we came in with other people, we had like 2 replacements, I think, for the next day. Every phase went down in a third of the time that we were doing it the day before. And it's like, and to me, that's like, is there some giga carry Chad in here with infinite gear that's just smashing the place to pieces? And you look at everybody's DPS was buffed. When we saw the logs afterwards, it was like everybody was doing so much more.
Yeah.
But I didn't change how I played.
Yeah,
we played the same way, and it just melted and died. So that's been a surprising aspect of the raiding, but we're getting used to it. It's how Guild Wars 2 works. It's okay that I'm not a fan of it. It's how Guild Wars 2 works. I was just surprised to see it so prevalent here when other games have moved away from that style to let people just do whatever and make groups. Because the last thing I want to do when we're doing projects like this, and the same with Destiny that we did last week, is what are you playing? Because I think that question's almost obnoxious. In the modern day era, is like, oh, you want to come? I like you. What are you playing though? Oh, well, sorry, we're looking for an alacrity guy, and you don't do it. So I can't invite you. Do you know that aspect of it? That's what I don't like.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. I mean, I guess I would kind of. I would almost push against that a little bit, in the sense that, well, in WoW, if they're looking for a tank and you're not a tank, you're not getting in. Right. That's
right. But Guild Wars 2 has that also.
Yeah. It does have that extra layer. So I definitely agree that there's almost this second layer, as you mentioned previously, on top of it. Like, okay, we need you to be a tank, but also an alacrity tank, right? Like that's what we're looking for here. I will say in the game's favor that actually the build diversity is like very, very good. People whine about balance. They always do, right?
Of course.
But actually, pretty much everything is good. Right, and there are a lot of options for what you want to play. Right, for example, you're playing funnily enough, Vindicator. You're going to be doing damage pretty much. But a lot of the other specializations in the game, you can play them as a healer. You can play them as a damage dealer. You can apply a key boon. Right, there's a lot of things that you can do a lot of the time. So I think the game almost compensates a little bit for that by making you quite flexible with your character and the way that you can go about playing it, for sure. But yeah, I completely get this whole thing about boons, for sure. It definitely is a system that it can almost make it difficult to understand why you're winning or losing. Right, I think this is an issue that a lot of newer players to the game find, is that they'll go, wait, I didn't change anything. Why am I doing so much better right now?
Yeah, that's how I felt on the strike.
Yeah. And I think that's a really big key issue. I won't spoil this, by the way. So I just, but there was actually a boss released with the latest expansion, and and it was quite difficult. This is an open world boss. Again, I won't spoil, but an open world boss was quite difficult, and it caused a lot of drama in the community and some unrest because people were failing, and it was like, why are we losing? I don't understand. Like, why is this group winning? Why is this group losing? What the hell is going on? And it was a big drama, like big controversy, and people were not happy at all with this. And I think that even a lot of players who've played the game for a long time almost have some difficulty in figuring out why we're winning, why we're losing, which I think leads to a lot of frustration overall with the player base. So I think that, again, I would really encourage veteran players to actually engage with this perspective regarding boons, because it is definitely a system that's radically different from how other games work, and can certainly be weird.
I'm not saying it's bad. I want to be absolutely clear on that. It was just something I was surprised to find and goes against how I play. I'm not saying it's bad. It's how Guild Wars 2 does things, and that's all about our journey through a Project MMO, is like, how are these games doing things differently? So it's not something I personally like. That doesn't mean it's bad by any means. If it suits the player base and the translation of the class flexibility, I've had no one complain about swapping to Alacrity or Might or anything like that in our raid team. Nobody's moaned about it. Maybe I'm a little more frustrated that I don't really provide anything to help, to fill that role. But I will say this though. So when you say that a new world boss came out and people were like not really understanding how this works, is it a part of the reason is that raiding wasn't very well accepted by the Guild Wars 2 community? Because we found out a lot of people just didn't take part in this system. And obviously it's gone now, essentially. They haven't released anything for it. And there's a huge portion of the Guild Wars 2 player base who has never had to interact with this system at all. It just doesn't come into their daily lives. Like boon management, subgroup management, how important it is, how vital it is.
Yeah.
Would you say that like there's a giant portion of the player base who've played for years who are like, I don't get it because it just doesn't affect my day-to-day life?
Yeah, absolutely correct. Yeah. A lot of the stuff in the open world, it's tuned in such a way that if enough people show up, you'll win. Right. And that's fine. Yeah, I think it's still fun, right? It's fun. The open world stuff is fun in my opinion, even though it's not super challenging. And it was really noticeable that when this new boss came out, is that players started realizing, hang on a minute, if we actually put subgroups to distribute boons, the boss dies. Holy shit, that's crazy, right? And it does make sense, because it wasn't relevant until it was, right? And oh no, now we're getting our ass kicked, right? Uh-oh, that's not good. And it was really interesting. I was this is a funny story. I was watching a streamer who was not super happy about this, and they were like, no, I will never do subgroups. They're not necessary. They're not good. They don't do anything. And they said, look, I'm going to show you guys that this boss is impossible. We can't do it. And they start the run on this particular boss that was out there. And I actually had a friend of mine infiltrate the squad and fix the subgroups. And you know what? They killed it.
Sussy. Yeah, I can totally see that. It's different. I can't really equate that to any of the other MMOs we're playing because they're not as strong. It's a Guild Wars 2 thing to have that. Like, I mean, in WoW, it'd be like a bad bloodlust or something like that. But you generally just, a world boss environment, you just be like, what an idiot. But we'll be fine. We're totally going to be fine. Which is interesting that it's prevalent over here. And it does need a bit of education in terms of how much power they give. I assume it shows up in your character tooltips. Is that how you'd monitor the DPS improvement? Like, does Might just give you a strength increase? I'm not even sure what they do.
Yeah, this is another thing that's a bit weird. Like some of the telegraphing it's not super great, to be honest. So here's the tooltips in this game are very, very unusual. When you mouse over a skill and you see the damage, it's showing you a weird number. It's showing you the damage of the skill before any damage modifiers that you have, and before critical strikes, and assuming an average armor. And I understand why it's like that. It's like that because buffs in Guild Wars 2 are very transient, right? You know, for example, when you dodge on your Vindicator, right, you get extra damage for a few seconds, right? And this is another kind of almost like problem with the game. And this is partially because in a way the game was built from the ground up aimed at a PvP combat system and world versus world. So when you try and translate that into PvE, where it's like, wait, are we assuming we have this all the time? Are we sure about that? I don't know. But a lot of builds, the way they operate is that you have a base damage of, say, 1,000. And then after you've got boons on top of that, after you've got critical strikes on top of that, after you've got all your damage modifiers, you could be looking at like 5x damage, right? Or something absolutely insane, right? On top of this, because all the modifiers stack up, right? You know, you got a 10%, you got a 15%, you got another 20% here. How about another 5%? What about 7%? And so the tooltip has a really difficult time in a way showing that to you.
It's not dynamic at all.
Yeah. It will change based on your stats. So your power stat, for example, or your condition damage stat. But it has a lot of difficulty showing you all, like, the full story, as it were. Like, how hard is that ability actually going to hit, right? The number on the tooltip is not going to match the number that you see very often when you actually hit something, which is a bit of a problem.
So, I guess this is done with just damage meter tracking on the golems, essentially, and logging. Is that how people are tracking the effectiveness of this stuff?
Yeah, and I think that, weirdly enough, this is definitely one of the main issues with the Guild Wars 2, and it's a classic complaint, is that if you want to track your performance, you pretty much have to use third-party software. And you might go, oh, but that's the same in WoW, right? And that's true, but the culture is very different, right? It's a lot more ubiquitous in World of Warcraft to, you know, get yourself a DPS meter. Even logging, right, is very common, right, in World of Warcraft. Whereas in Guild Wars 2, not really. It's something that obviously you'll be exposed to if you get into raids and so on. All that kind of stuff. If you're like, oh, I want to blast my DPS, I've got to figure out how much DPS I'm doing. But especially like on the launch of raids, for example, DPS meters were an absolute, like, you know, you kind of find a guy in a shady alley and you get handed a DLL to inject into the game, right? It was only until quite, you know, fairly deep into the expansion was that ArenaNet said, okay, you can use exactly this one DPS meter. Everything else, don't ask, don't tell. So for a lot of time, like, measuring your performance was very hard to do without being a little bit spooked. Right, which obviously made it worse, and even the golem, right, didn't exist all the time, right? For the
well, I assume they wanted the FF14 style, where we don't want people linking damage meters and excluding players because of poor performance, things like that. However, they also created a system where your damage can dramatically swing depending on what's going on in the fight and who's in the group. So they kind of went for a both ways approach. Is not only do we not want you to have a damage meter because of the inherent problems it creates in the community, but at the same time, you kind of need to know that you're doing 5x damage if you bring this group setup versus this other group setup. That's a big deal. So where do we fall on that meter of how do we want things? You know, it's got to go one way or the other, which means they probably had to accept the damage meters if they wanted to keep this power swing in place.
And here's the really big issue, because I mean, I imagine you can probably see where this is going. I'm sure you played loads of MMOs. If the game doesn't provide you the ability to kind of figure out what's going on, the players will kind of guess and make do. So instead, and this happened in the core game, this is so funny actually, you would get kicked from dungeon groups, or you'd have a dungeon group that would require a certain number of achievement points, right? Or you'd say, oh yeah, no necromancers. Stuff like this. It was dumb.
We call it gear score.
Yeah. Yeah. So because of the lack of metrics provided by the game, the players kind of made up their own, right? Which obviously are not quite as good, right? And Guild Wars 2 and Arena, they almost refuse to accept this as a reality, right? Because this is a reality. If you don't provide ways for players to essentially set standards for their group, where, you know, we want you to be experienced, we want you to be playing this particular build and applying this particular boon, and, you know, have, you know, you've cleared this on challenge mode in order to join. If you don't have stuff like that, the players will do it, but worse. Right? Essentially, way worse. And that was definitely something that has kind of plagued the game, I would say. It's not awful. It was probably worse early on, actually, when the balance was a bit but certainly, yeah, the lack of metrics and almost like leadership features in the game have really caused it some problems when it comes to the more challenging content.
Which has been not received particularly well, right? We're talking about a very niche portion of the community for Guild Wars 2. And I guess you could probably fill me in a little bit on the history and the rating, is that My first impression of I've done the first raid now.
Mm.
I think I've got 3 wings left to do, I believe, which comes maybe, I don't know, Path of Fire, I think. But there's a lot of dramatic changes between each wing, which reeks to me of a team that was investing a lot of money and a lot of time into not only designing, creating the artwork, the models, everything for the raids, and then the players just not taking part in it. And them not really understanding why, because I assume there was some outcry for raids in the original base game. Is people like, well, where the hell's the raid? We would like a raid, please. And it not happening. And you can see through the design of the raids, they were like changing things a lot to try and accommodate the Guild Wars 2 community, to encourage them to take part, which makes it feel very messy and all over the place. And then ultimately, they've kind of given up, is the impression I'm giving, is like the players just don't really want it en masse. And we can make something better for everybody else, right? That's the simple case. We can make something that 80% of the players will take part in, rather than the same investment going to something 20% of the players will take part in, which is a real shame. And I wonder what your thoughts were like as you were there at the time. What was happening there with the feedback on raids and what people were asking for? Because we've been trying to research that. You know, got Lord knows Bex has been digging into the Wayback Machine and all sorts to try and find feelings at the time. But we don't have that information, but you do. Is how did it translate? Like in your community, was it like, oh god, this is awesome, we're getting raids, but clearly it was not accepted by the Guild Wars 2 player base?
So yeah, I'll dig into that, but I almost want to give a bit of context here first on where the game is right now, because I think that's it's quite interesting that you said that. Funnily enough, Guild Wars 2 has actually released relatively recently the hardest encounter ever in the game by far. Not even close, actually. In terms of the difficulty, it actually took the best guilds, and this is unheard of in the game. It took a week to kill it, which is completely unheard of within Guild Wars 2. In fact, it was so exciting, such a momentous occasion. You know, I actually spoke to Liquid Maximum about it, and even Scripe showed up in my chat, actually going like, "Ooh, Guild Wars 2," all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of like where the game is. It's more that they've kind of changed their approach. This is a classic Guild Wars 2 thing. They'll go, well, raids aren't working. How about this? And it's strike missions, right? Like strike missions are the new raids, essentially. Gotcha. With this kind of stuff. But raids, I think the biggest problem with this, and I'm curious what you make of this, actually. The biggest problem with raids that really caused issues was there was no difficulty setting, right, for this stuff. And on launch, raids were kind of hard. Raids were tuned in such a way that you kind of had to do pretty well to get through them. Right, we kind of glanced at power creep a little while back, but right now, when those raids came out, characters I want to say were like 2 to 3 times weaker than they are now. Broadly speaking, in terms of like the power level. And that's kind of more like a group aggregate. I'm not saying everyone did literally half DPS. In fact, in some cases, you did more. It's more like the way the game works has changed. Like back then, you essentially ran 6 supports and 4 DPS. Now you kind of run 2 healers and 8 DPS. That's how the game works. And there's been, you know, healers are better now, boons are better now, right? Like boons get shared way easier, you know, blah, 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 blah. All this kind of stuff. Back there. And so raids were kind of rock hard on launch. And ArenaNet were completely opposed to difficulty settings, right? It was like, nope, this is the difficulty, get good or go away. And
interesting.
And it was pretty brutal, right?
And they just left everybody kind of stuck then.
Yeah. And that definitely caused, I think, some big retention issues. Then we can talk about the balance, right? Like if you didn't have chronomancers, have fun, right? And so it was very kind of, you were very pigeonholed into how you would go about approaching them. And a lot of the really powerful builds were quite tricky to play, actually, particularly Chronomancer, kind of the most important thing. It was actually quite difficult to actually execute that build well, and honestly nobody wanted to do it. I in fact ended up in my guild as a Chrono main because nobody else wanted to play it. They were like, nope, I'm not going anywhere near that. I was like, well, okay.
In there.
Yeah. and you're just completely forced to play this build, like forever and ever and ever. You know, of course, it's Chrono Jail is how it's referred to, right? Like you're never getting out. Have fun, with that. And yeah, I think there were a lot of issues around raids themselves that caused the thing. I think a lot of people say, "Oh, casual game raids are never going to work." I actually disagree. I think that players would absolutely enjoy content like this. It's simply that it wasn't accessible, right? And with all MMOs, I mean, look, you know, we can talk about World of Warcraft and talk about Final Fantasy. I think what these games do really well is they try to make the content as accessible as possible, right? So that all players have got, you know, a fair shot at being able to experience these encounters without having to go too far out of their way. And of course, that's further exemplified by group finding systems. There's no group finding system in Guild Wars 2. The matchmaker, like LFR or something. And the squad systems are kind of weird. You have to pay to get a commander tag to make a squad, right?
Thank you, whoever sent me the gold.
Appreciate all that kind of stuff. And, you know, I almost feel like I want to let you get back in, Archie, because I feel like I could list off a million issues on why this type of content really had difficulty sticking.
No, it's important. Accessibility is important because a lot of people do not want to commit that kind of time, but they want to see it. Obviously, it's in their game. They paid for the game. They want to see that content.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never been one to be against that level of accessibility. I've never been an LFR hater, beyond the fact that a lot of people just stop at that point because there's no encouragement to go forward, which is the initial issues with it. But you're right if that's the case, because I look at it from the design. What am I seeing? Okay, how do these bosses work versus how they worked in the next wing when they had months and months to prepare, and like the feedback they must have got there. And I see different things than the fact of people. Day one, I have no doubt the whole player base tried to get into the raid to see what the hell was going on, got crushed into the earth, and then we're like, well, I'm not doing this. Like, this is not what I'm used to, right? This is just not going to fly. Yeah. And then they're on a losing battle because first impressions are everything. Right? They're waiting to see. They're waiting to see. Some people will try in the first 10 minutes, and then they'll leave, and they're not going to try again until Raid Wing 2 at best. They're not going to go back in until some patch comes in with a massive, massive nerf. Did it launch with the challenge modes?
So wings 1 through 3, of course, don't have challenge modes, but yeah, from wing 4 onwards, this is like a big shift in their approach, kind of. They started saying, okay, right, we need to do something about this. We need to maybe make the normal mode a bit more accessible, and we'll still make it super hard with the challenge mode. And that started from wing 4 onwards. I guess wing 3 technically had a challenge mode with Keep Construct, right? But yeah, wings 4, 5, 6, and 7, they all have challenge modes for each boss, and yes, they launched with those challenge modes. So they kind of explained their design here. What they did was they designed the challenge mode first, and then they kind of pulled stuff out of it and said, okay, that's the normal mode, right? Essentially. And well, I won't spoil anything because I think that maybe you'll have a go at some of those in Wing 4. The Wing 4 ones are super good, right? They're really good, actually.
Well, the Constructs is one of my favorite bosses of Wing 3. Like, I love the Construct boss. I thought it was great.
Well, you might be a little disappointed with that one. But
we'll see. Then again, you said Demos was the easiest fight in there, and we spent 7 hours on it. So, you know.
I was maybe being a little facetious.
I have a different opinion on the boss style when we get in there. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out then. Yeah, because did Wing 4 the most popular then? As it was more accessible.
Oh, that's the thing.
Or was the message lost in the ether by then?
That's the problem. That it was the damage had almost been done to an extent. Because also here's some real fun context. Wings 1, 2, 3 came out pretty quickly in quick sequence. There's a bit of a gap between Wing 3 and 4.
You have been Stockholm syndromed by Guild Wars 2. They did not come out quickly. There's months between them. Come on.
What? Oh, no, yeah, sorry. Oh, no, I apologize. I was talking relatively speaking for Guild Wars 2. And you've
correct.
Seen,
that's the correct answer.
Yeah. I mean, you've seen the website, right? You've seen the release website.
I have the full chronology in a spreadsheet of when they came out. Yeah. And it's like, quick for Guild Wars 2. Okay, we'll put it that way.
Yeah. The wings came out relatively quickly at that point. From then on, the gaps are pretty long, but here's the real kicker. The communication on that was not good. So a lot of raiders had absolutely no idea if another raid was coming or not. People didn't know, right? If there was another raid. So obviously, you just cleared the wing. Awesome. Is there even a next one? I don't know. To be honest, right? We don't know. ArenaNet did not communicate this. And so obviously this led to a huge buildup of frustration. You just don't know when the next raid encounters are coming out in the game.
Right.
So obviously that kind of caused a lot of people to leave. But yeah, the gaps kind of increased after Wing 3 onwards, and that kind of caused a deterioration in the community. But also, yeah, quite a lot of damage had been done from Wings 1 through 3. And I feel a little bit bad saying that, because personally, I'm actually curious from a WoW perspective what you think. I actually thought they did a pretty good job with the actual raid designs. I think they're really fun to play through, actually, and have some interesting mechanics, and have got some really cool stuff there. I think they did a good job on their encounter design most of the time anyway.
Yeah. It's a mixed bag. In that there are definitely bosses in Wings 1 through 4 that could pass as modern day raid bosses, and I was really surprised by that. And then there's some that just missed the mark. But I think what it was is, we've seen this in other games as well. Destiny 2 is very guilty of this. It looks like they were trying to carve their own niche. And how are they going to do that? To make it Guild Warsy, right? Because Raid Wing 1 is... I prefer the second boss as my favorite that we did there, with the jumping off the platforms. You got to use the gliding mastery, and you got to come back. Now, I know people skip a lot of the mechanics on that fight, but we didn't. So that made sense to us. But the first boss was horrible. They played it so safe, which I don't particularly blame them for. It's such a traditional design, is to fight the boss before you fight the boss. So you kind of get a good idea what's going on. All right, okay, we're playing it super, super safe here and introducing people to raiding. Fine. That's okay. Yeah. Sabbather is... I mean, I don't know for sure, but it's very heavily inspired by another boss that already exists, that's very, very similar to that fight, in terms of how it plays out. But that doesn't mean it's not a good boss by any means. It was a very fun boss. I like the jumping around mechanic. And then you get over to Wing 2, where they started with the hardest boss, in my opinion.
Yep.
Right? Which was... So like instantly you're kind of confused, right? It's like, okay, we spent the longest time doing Slothazor, and that was my favorite fight in that raid. And I was like, God, this raid wing is going to be pretty tough, because that's how it started. And then we get the fort battle, which I'm like, what is this? Why have you made this? Like, this is crazy. And then I didn't like the... What was the last boss of Wing 2?
Matthias.
Oh yeah, I didn't enjoy that fight, because that fight has its... For us, you know, the blind rating, the difficulty curve was at the start, and then we just kind of killed it once we got over that hump. So again, another mixed bag, a mixed message going out to the community. Is it like Slothazor is like a wall, and then afterwards you kind of just get free-ish stuff? That's weird. And then you get to Raid Wing 3, which I think, again, the raid design changes a lot, and again, people aren't taking part in it, and they're trying to encourage people in some way to get involved in the system, because it's costing a lot of money to make raids. Like, I've seen the budgets for raid design. It's incredibly expensive to make a raid. And then they put in like Twisted Castle, and you're like, I just need to find who made this and just make them go outside in the rain and sit on their own for a second, because why would you do this to a human being? Why would you do this? But then really the most impressive boss that I've seen, which was Zera, is beautiful and really well designed. Like, that could pass easily in FF14's raids. It would never work in a WoW raid, but in FF14, the Zera boss would be astronomically good. People would love that fight so much, and that's incredible considering how old it is. What, 2016, I think. If that came out in the next FF14 patch, nobody would be mad. That is cool. That is a very cool fight with a lot going on with it. And then Raid Wing 4 is all over the place again, with different things going on, like the Demos fight having that weird 10% phase, which I guess they put in because people liked Zera. So they're like, oh, we need the big grandiose guy. But then again, now you've just said they made the challenge mode first. Maybe that plays a bigger part in the challenge mode version of Demos, and that's why it's there, although it makes no sense in the normal mode version. But a very confusing... There's almost, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, I want to be clear on this, but it is how it feels. It feels like there's a desperation to Raid 1's design, encompassing all 1 to 4, which is, they don't like this, let's change it for Wing 2. They didn't like that, let's change it again. They didn't like that, let's change it again, to try and get people involved. That desperation, because we're putting all this effort in, we're making all this work, our bosses are good. The bosses I didn't like are like the escort mission with Glenna, Like, starting your raid with an escort mission is a criminal offense. Like, that person should be in jail. That's insane that you would start a raid with an escort mission. Like, absolutely crazy. Don't do that. Don't do that. But generally, there are sparks of genius in that raid. Like, really creative design, which is why I'm excited for the next raid and the strike missions, because the potential is so clearly there for greatness. But it looks desperate and muddled. And I think I can only imagine what the community feedback was. It's like, so this is really hard. Wing 2 is really hard with Slothazor, so we can't try that. And now you're saying Wing 4 is easier, and now it's got a challenge mode, but I've heard of Twisted Castle in Wing 3, and then there's like a chess thing. Do you know what I mean? This mixed message that's going out with a lack of consistency. And I generally find in MMOs, gentle baby steps in the right direction is the way to go. Because your audience has a certain expectation when they step into that raid, and if it changes too dramatically, people aren't really sure what's going on, and they get a bit annoyed with dealing with it. So it's like baby steps could have been the way, but I think it's just the lack of participation and maybe negative feedback in the forums and things led to them making some kind of quick decisions on changes that needed to be made in the raid. But again, great bosses in there. Overall, fantastic. Like Construct, Zera, Demos, the Slothazor I loved. Absolutely loved that fight. Sabather was fantastic. Yes, it's inspired by other fights, but Demos is inspired by Lich King as well, right? I mean, we could talk oil. Are you an oiler or a defiler?
Well, here in Guild Wars 2. Oh no, I mean it's oil. Here in Guild Wars 2. But I mean, you know, I was familiar with the mechanic because I actually did raid actually in Wrath, funnily enough. So I had kind of seen that one before to an extent. But yeah, no, in Guild Wars 2, it's oil, right? I'm afraid that's the way it is. You know, we got to get the oiler spam in the chat. It's probably one of the more infamous mechanics in the game because you know if one person messes it up, well, I mean, I guess that's unfortunate for you. You know, it's
Yeah, I mean, you guys can claim whatever you want, but it's not true.
Oh, brutal.
Yeah. Defile came first.
That's true. That is true.
Defile came first.
It's very true.
It's Defile for now until the end of times.
Yeah.
But yeah, like overall, I think it's 13 bosses. I think 7 of them I really, really enjoyed. There was only like 2 I really disliked. That was it. That was like boss 1 and the slowing boss. I forget its name. Ken.
Yeah, that's a weird one. Yeah.
We didn't even figure that out. Like mechanically, we solved every boss mechanically, but we were like, just whatever, just kill the boss.
Yeah,
and it died.
This is actually a really scary moment. Like everyone was very excited for Wing 4 when it came out, and it actually died almost immediately on a lot of the guild's first playthrough. I killed it with my group on the second try actually, and it was like, whoa, what the hell? What the hell's going on here? Everyone was kind of like, everyone was sweating, right? Like, what's happened here? Why is it so easy? For sure, yeah. That's definitely one of the weirdest bosses in the game, to be honest. I'm not entirely sure what they were going for.
Solve, I think. Yeah. I think it's the only. There are definitely a couple of mechanics we never solved, like the soak patches on Demos. We had no idea what they did, but it made sense to soak them. Like they're probably bad. Everything else we solved. That fight, we were like, whatever. Like, just kill it. And let's move on with our lives and get out of here. But a wonderful experience, though. I love seeing the progression of the design and stuff like that. Like, because we did this project with FF14, which starts very WoW focused with its Coils raid all the way back in 2014, I want to say, and then they baby steps it though. So its Coils is pretty consistent. Then they had Alexander, which comes out at the same time as the Heart of Thorns raids. They're almost side by side in terms of the dates of the releases of the wings. Very slow increments to find their perfect goal. So I'm super excited to see what happens with the next raids, to see where they took it from here. Because I don't know what the raids are, but with that break, were people prepared to step into the raids again? Like once it had been, they'd had that gap.
Okay, I have to kind of ask some admission here. I can give a little bit of a teeny tiny detail about the next raid without spoiling the mechanics, but I almost don't want to spoil you. So you have to say if you want to be a teeny tiny little bit spoiled going into Wing
nothing
5.
Mechanically.
Nothing mechanically. Okay, yeah, gotcha.
Nothing mechanically.
Wing 5 was by far the hardest set of bosses they released.
Interesting.
Up until
that's
that
a 25-minute encounter for our team, though.
Yeah, like Wing 5 kind of absolutely wrecked people, to be honest, especially the challenge modes of the final boss. But that is all I will say in that regard.
Okay.
So Wing 5 actually had pretty low participation rate for that reason.
They needed a win there, I think.
It was pretty intense. And what's interesting, actually, is that kind of continued. In fact, the most feared raid wing, the wing that people don't pug, they dare not pug, is Wing 6, actually. That is the one that abandoned all hope, right? Well, I'm obviously being a little silly, but you know what I mean, right? Like it's definitely one that people are a little bit spooked about in general.
Interesting.
In that regard.
So good times ahead is what you're saying.
Oh yeah. Honestly,
good times ahead.
I've got to say, Wing 6 and Wing 7 are honestly spectacular, right? In terms of the way that I think you're going to have a lot of fun there as well, and certainly particularly the final boss of Wing 5 in that regard. But yeah, no spoilers, obviously. But yeah, there's some really cool stuff for sure ahead. In that regard. But yeah, and one thing that is kind of worth mentioning here actually is that Wings 1, 2, and 3, that was like the first package of raids. Those were all developed at the same time. Wing 4 was like okay, stop, this is the next thing, right?
Yeah, this is the question we had.
Yeah, and then so it was Wing 1, 2, 3, that was all a package. Then Wing 4, Wing 5, Wing 6, Wing 7. Wing 6 and 7 well, no, actually, let's not go there. But yeah, like that's kind of the way.
We could come back after we've done it, right? We could come back and we could hash it out then.
Yeah. It'll be and I'm definitely very curious to see how like you view the evolution of the game, because you're talking about how they changed it. This is something that Guild Wars 2 does a lot, and in fact, I would say that this is probably one of the main issues the game has struggled from, is that they haven't found a consistent idea of how they want to do things, and that goes across the entire thing. I wanted to talk about this a little bit earlier actually, but we delved into the raids. But one thing that you picked up on immediately, which is very much the case, is how different the story of the game was and how they delivered that, right? As the game went on, both in kind of like the narrative style, the delivery mechanism, right, and the quality, right, of all that kind of stuff, radically changed as they moved through. And when you get to Living World Season 4 and the stuff that comes after, I'm very intrigued, because there are some pretty big differences in the entire thing. The game is very different. Path of Fire is a very different expansion to Heart of Thorns, right? And Ender Dragons is different to those two as well, which is a bit of a blessing and a curse, right? Because the game has a huge amount of variety. You're having this totally different experience with some of this new content. But on the other hand, there is something to be said for some consistency and iteration upon old systems as well.
Yeah, I don't blame the base game story is horrendous, but I don't blame an MMO for generally having a weak starter story, especially when it's not a new IP. Guild Wars 1 existed, but it's maybe not the primary focus they're going for. Like the story in the base game is basically, I saw it more as you can go over here. And that's kind of its purpose, right? It followed on from, I did not play Guild Wars 1. The characters were fundamentally unlikable, which is not helpful, including my own. I very much regretted making my non-female immediately. And I disabled her voice actions very quickly, because Might is right. I agree. But I don't need that much reminding of it. So, yeah, the story was not very well told. But I then did... Okay, I think, again, the chronology is strange here, because I played Living World Season 1, which was dramatically better. But it's also the remastered version of Living World Season 1. I saw so many vast improvements in terms of leading you through the instances, because I kept getting lost in some of them. They were not, like, level design-wise, they weren't great. But in Living World Season 1, I was like, okay, now we've got, like, arrows, directions, there's indicators, the NPCs are kind of moving with you rather than just following you. That makes a lot of sense. They kind of ditched the original cast. And then we got some really good characters that I actually felt invested in. Like Jory and Casimir were really good. And their stories were like, okay, this is a story I can get invested in. Brahm's there too, but I mean, thankfully he can be ignored. But characters I could really care about, which was like, this is what I need for you to guide me through this story. And I found that, like, okay, it's improving. By Path of Fire, they found their road, it looks like to me. It's like, this is, people like a big story. And again, I come back to what Guild Wars 2 does better than anyone else, is big, grandiose settings. And generally from the core of me, yes, I'm excited about the raids and the strikes. I'm more excited to see the epic scale world stuff and how that has evolved. Like Mordramoth was an eye-opener. I had no idea what was going to happen there until I saw a dragon bigger than I've ever seen in any video game rise out of the clouds, and so beautifully animated. Like their animation team is just off the chain. You look at, let's say we go back to WoW with its modern stuff. We can look at the jailer. That guy can't walk 2 steps without sliding across the floor because they can't handle big models. He like roller skates across the floor. It looks ridiculous. Well, Mordramoth looks perfect. Zera is one of the most beautifully animated raid bosses I've ever seen, and I can't wait to see how they escalate that going forward. But yeah, Living World, and then Living World 2 kind of backtracks it because Living World 1 is like a remaster, essentially. So it's got a lot of modern bells and whistles in it, but it's still very, very good. And it got better and better and better. And now I was actually kind of glad we did the first part of our Destiny 2 challenge in 2 days. Whereas Guild Wars 1, clearing the first raid was like a 10-day venture because I had to get to Heart of Thorns and I had to go through Living Worlds and all that. It was like 10 to 12 days before I could even start the raid. In Destiny 2, you could do it from day 1. So we cleared the raid on the second day, and then I was like, oh, good, I can go back to Path of Fire. Like, I was genuinely excited to go back into that experience and get involved with Balthazar and see what's going on. Compared to my first review of Guild Wars 2, which was like, the story is absolute dog shit. I hate it. It's terrible. And you can see the directions changed even with my voice actor, is they've clearly let her have some more freedom, and she's got some more personality now, and I've turned her audio back on. Now it's way better. Like, they clearly freed her up to be like, okay, yes, your character will be not might equals right. I am here. It's not perfect, and I imagine there was some community backlash to certain characters that died. I don't want to... Yeah, I mean, this is obviously people who know everything is here. Like, Air's death was just like, what the hell? Why did you do this? This is so weird. And then they kind of retroactively, I guess that maybe based on feedback, they threw a big ceremony into the living world to sort of send her on her way properly. Because I imagine I wasn't the only one who was like, what the fuck? Like, this is a big deal to my story that's going on. The story is significantly better now. One thing I have noticed, though, did they, in your opinion, did they change what Living World is? In Living World 1, my impression of it was that they wanted to do something that other MMOs don't do, which is evolve the landscape that already exists. Which is what they did in Living World 1 with the Shadow Tower, is there was, apparently if you were playing at the time, and again, we're going kind of retroactively looking at this, is things were happening in that zone before Living World came out. There was an inclination, there was things starting to happen, something strange is happening there. Then Living World 1 came out, and there's a Shadow Tower there. Holy crap. And there's been feelings, there's been stirrings of this thing happening. But now it looks like they just moved to adding more zones. Like, that's, instead of evolving the current world, I only thought about this the other day. It's like, they haven't really done anything like I saw in Living World 1, which I was very excited about, is like evolving the current landscape. They've just added a new zone instead and gone that way. Is that something that the community is happy with or against, or am I off track here?
So the original plan for the game, to be honest, it sounds pretty incredible and remarkable because, yeah, they did want to make something super different, but it was also totally unhinged. They wanted to add new content to the game every 2 weeks. Right, and they actually did this for a good time. That was basically season 1, more or less, right? And it would add a new event. It would be a new thing. Sometimes there'd be a bit of a new map attached to it. There'd be things happening in the old maps. The map would permanently change, right? All this kind of stuff, right? But the problem is that, one, that absolutely obliterated their poor developer team, who just melted into the ground, obviously, with that level of grind. But also, they removed the content. Okay? Content essentially was transient, right? It was there for a little while, and then, it's gone, right? So, obviously, people are like, I've got to log in and play the game. But also, congratulations, you've missed it, right? And you can never play it ever again. I think, and I understand where they were going with this, because this is actually the only thing that didn't really make it back, funnily enough, into season 1. The first bit of season 1 was actually basically Lion's Arch being attacked by crustaceans, right? That's welcome to Guild Wars 2.
Daddies.
Yeah, and there was actually a one-time boss fight, right? They said, here you go, this boss fight is going to happen now, and it will never happen again, right? So don't miss it.
What an astronomical waste of resources.
Yeah, and that's basically kind of the story of Living World Season 1. And yeah, you completely are correct on this as well. The content was maybe not quite what ArenaNet would have liked to develop. You know, sometimes your living world content is you have to fix some signposts, right? And, you know, that's fun, right? You know, that's your gameplay, is fixing some signposts, which, you know, maybe not the best in that regard. And yeah, moving towards the newer model from season 3, well, season 2 kind of, but season 3 is where they kind of hit their stride on the format, right? Is where things really started to kind of kick into gear, and they went to, all right, we're going to add new stuff here, and it's not going to disappear from the game, right, as well. So yeah, the game radically shifted in that regard. And, you know, I get it. It's kind of cool that the world is actually changing, right? You know, I think they were trying to target that idea of, we just killed this NPC, but oh, actually, he's still here, actually, you know? It's not actually gone. Like, how many different versions of Thrall can you find in World of Warcraft, right? It's like, oh, okay, well, this is a bit weird. Like, all that kind of thing, like, about the place. That's what they wanted to do, and I get it, but maybe a little ambitious, or maybe a little unrealistic, or impossible.
No, I get it, because I had the conversation with Blizzard when I was there, and they said the same thing. It's like, it's just not worth the time to do it that way. As much as it makes sense if you're a current player, like, it absolutely makes sense. If you're a current player, it's absolutely awesome. It's so cool to be like, what's happening? We don't know, you know, theory crafting and mystery. But you're right. One, it all can only happen once, so you can get that. You can only get that response the first time, and then it's done. And if you're not there, you just miss out on it. So it's a double whammy of fail. I don't mind the addition of new zones, but I believe the original idea of calling it Living World was that the world was going to evolve in the landscape it existed in, which is what you see in Living World Season 1, is this change of the current landscape, where it then shifted with 2 and 3, which I've done, to it's an additional new zone. It's a new place to go and investigate. And then we can have fun with it. We can do whatever the hell we want in there, which I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. I was just curious what the community felt about changing that approach from the original approach.
I think overall people reacted to it positively. I don't think there was a lot of negativity, actually. I think that season 3 in particular was actually very well received. People really liked the one. Season 3 and season 4, I would say, are definitely big time favorites for the community. Some will say season 3, some will say season 4. But yeah, I think those are the ones where I think the player base was like super happy with the content, delivering the new maps and new areas to explore, new achievements, new rewards, alongside you know, a much more robust narrative, I would say, with how they went about doing that.
Yeah, I've done Living World Season 3 now, I believe. I've got 4 to go. Because are they dropping Living World content now in favor of expansions, I believe?
So what they're doing, like, we'll cut through the PR. They're basically selling you Living World instead in the expansions. That's what's going on here. So they've gone from, you buy the expansion and you log in and you get the Living World for free, right? If you log in, right? And they're changing that to, you buy the expansion, it comes out with maps and stuff, and then packaged in with that expansion are the future updates. So a lot more similar to, say, World of Warcraft, right? In a sense, right? You have your patch 10.1, you got your 10.2, right? Etc. And that's essentially the model that Guild Wars 2 are going to be using. We don't know for sure, because obviously I'm sure they're still working out to an extent. Looks like it's going to be yearly, right? So you might buy an expansion every year. And then basically you're buying the expansion, and then attached to that expansion is essentially going to be Living World, but under another name, right? It is essentially what it's going to be. Yeah, that's where it's going.
Yeah, it doesn't seem... nothing I've seen with the Guild Wars 2 business model seems egregious. I haven't met anything that's like, ugh, that's a bit icky. Like, even the gems aren't done in bundles for discounts. It's the same price whether you buy a load or not.
Yeah.
So it's not the rich getting richer type of scenario, you know, that kind of situation going on. And the Living Worlds seem very fairly priced. It's interesting that you don't have to get them, which is a shame, I think, if you've skipped out on them. The game must seem so mysterious. If you don't play the Living World, you probably get like a brief trailer, essentially trying to explain that you missed all this stuff out, but it's pretty important now. So far, nothing too egregious that I've seen with the business.
Yeah, it's very fair. There are a few things that you can grumble about. You know, you've got there are some skins, for example, that are exclusive to the Black Lion chests, like the loot box style things. Like, okay, that ain't that good, right? And some of the things like build templates, if you want to store multiple builds in your character, they kind of milk you a bit on that one, to be honest, in terms of the gems. But at the end of the day, I do think what works in the game's favor is that you can farm it with gold if you want to, right? Like, you know, you're not locked out of the quality of life if you don't want to spend money, which, you know, I think overall Guild Wars 2 is very fair, right? It would be nice to have some mount skins that you could earn in the game, right? But you know, whatever.
And none of them available in game.
There is.
I didn't know that.
There is one
that's
available in game. Yeah.
Out of all the mounts.
Correct. Yes.
One.
Well, you can get all. You can obviously unlock all the mounts, right? You can unlock all the mounts.
Yeah. You get all the mounts,
game,
but there's not like I would have assumed a lot of them. A lot of mount skins were achievement based. Is that?
No. There is one mount skin that isn't like a cash shop item. Obviously, you can grind the gold, right, to buy gems. Yeah. But yeah, there is one mount skin in the game as of right now. It's for the World versus World mount. Funnily enough, actually, is what that's for.
Interesting. I can't believe you guys played without a mount for so long. That's just like sticking needles in your eyes. That's painful. I mean, they came in with you kind of mentioned before we started, there was a very strong we're not WoW style approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Very much.
Almost to the point of stubbornness, would you say?
Oh, I would definitely say that. I think that their unwillingness to bend on some of these things has caused a few problems within the game, like the way they approached group content, ultimately even things like progression, a bit more directed flow with how you play, stuff like not having quests as such. They kind of went back on that now with collections a little bit. But yeah, a lot of these things that kind of direct the player or allow the player to have some type of progression or improvement in some way definitely has caused issues. You know, the way they approached PvE, again, they've kind of changed on that now to more of a Trinity style thing. Like a lot of these things for sure are things that the game, how could I forget? The lack of difficulty options, like, oh no, the World of Warcraft has heroic. That we're not WoW, we're not going to have that, right? That was a huge problem, I think, because some of the things that it's a really weird thing because Guild Wars 2, I'm sure you've heard, casual game, noob game, like, only complete scrubs play this. One of the major issues
I've not heard that actually.
Really? That's actually
that's never been the message.
Yeah, I kind of get that a lot. Like whenever I see this on like other MMOs, like other MMO streams, people always say, "Oh yeah, Guild Wars 2 is nothing but casual trash."
Yeah, but that's the same as FF14 is the weeb game, right?
Yeah,
like,
I see what you mean.
It's the same outside perspective that you get, and WoW is the elitist game. But I mean, my overall point of view that I said is, if you're a fan of MMOs. And you're not playing Guild Wars 2, you're just hurting yourself.
Ooh.
Like that's how I genuinely feel that way. Like if you're a fan of MMOs in general and you're not like trying out Guild Wars 2, okay, that's on you. But you're kind of being you're kind of just being a douche. There's a lot to enjoy here for any average MMO player. And yeah, I do find the game right now very casual. It's not a game. Guild Wars 2 so far, and again, we're only halfway through, so pinch of salt, everybody. Isn't the game I would come to for hardcore content. Yeah. This isn't the game I would come to for that. Sure. That's available elsewhere. And maybe that is there. Like you said, they just released the hardest boss. So I'm halfway along this road, if not like a third of the way through this journey. So maybe it is there waiting for me. But right now it's not. It's not where I would come for that kind of content. But for content, I want to jump in with friends and do some fractals and jump back out again. Awesome. The same way I kind of play Path of Exile is, jump in, do some maps, have some fun. I don't have to dedicate an evening to Guild Wars 2, like right now. And if raiding, sure, demos took us 7 hours, but everything else we did in like a 3-hour window, I think. Every other raid wing we cleared in that time, which is really fun. That's a good afternoon. It's good fun. But that's where I am with it right now. And I honestly, with FF14, I get it. Every screenshot anybody ever sends you of FF14 is somebody dressed as a chicken or as a giant elephant in pink lights, sat in a hot tub with a cat girl. I get it. I was put off by the game for this exact same reason, but it's not what the game is about. That is there, but that's people trolling you hardcore, dressed as Power Rangers and all sorts of stuff. But at the same time, some of the outfits I've seen in Guild Wars 2...
Oh, yeah.
Aren't exactly doing it any favors either.
Yeah.
Every game could make them, as can World of Warcraft, by the way, for those guys who look down on the other games. It's like, well, I play World of Warcraft while you're running around.
I would never have
a
any of this
tiny
stuff.
Fox. Yeah, look, I'm a little tiny fox dressed in hot pants. Like, don't come to me with that attitude. So I did have to raid as a maid in Guild Wars 2,
Ooh.
and everybody else in the raid joined in as well. It's one of those there's stuff I want to do right now. Like I do want to finish my masteries in Heart of Thorns. Like there's some I want to get, which I didn't think I'd feel that way about. I think I'd move on. I'm not going to come back. We'll come back, and I kind of want to go and get my ascended trinkets. All these little goals are not things that I need to dedicate. I've got to tell my wife and kids I'm busy tonight. I'm going farming this.
I'm grinding.
Right? Yeah, I'm grinding. Like I'm busy tonight. I'm going to be doing X and Y. That's not what I found with Guild Wars 2 at all. And I think it's its biggest appeal to me so far. And it's what I'd sell the game on. When people ask me, it's like, "Hey, are you enjoying it?" Yeah, and this is why.
Yeah.
Because that hardcore stuff's always there. Right? You want to farm out a legendary. Every game has those grinds. They're there to be done. But for now, there's just a ton of stuff you can do on your off time, which is
yeah.
Especially with the timer. I thought that was a wonderful system. Is the meta event timer. Because when I started using that just in Heart of Thorns, there was something to do that was big and grandiose almost every 15
all the time.
minutes.
Exactly. Yeah,
It was constant.
And that's all over the world too. There's a whole bunch of those, and more get introduced as you play through the game. So yeah, you can pretty much always go somewhere to get something done. Yeah, I completely agree with that. Guild Wars 2, it's as grindy as you want it to be, right? Like you can grind this game like a maniac if you want to, or don't. And it's not really going to... It's not going to impact your experience in a negative way if you don't. I think that's what's really nice about the game, or one of the things that's really nice about the game, is that if you grind a lot, great. You can have fun and you'll have a good time. But if you don't, you can still basically do everything in the game. You're not going to get held back because you aren't willing to, just absolutely blast like 10 hours a day, right, on getting all these things. You're going to be okay in that regard.
And it's such a strong point of any MMO right now, especially because the world has changed, right, in terms of MMOs, especially, and we've got like 7 new MMOs coming out in the next 12 months, which are all vying to find their own path. And MMOs always launch badly because it takes a couple of years to find their feet. I'll be interested to see how they launch with their style of things, because now I'm through the base game. I had mixed thoughts. The story was trash. I did the dungeons. I totally see why they were removed. They made no sense with Guild Wars 2 style of gameplay. I don't know how you feel about the dungeons, but I'm not sad they're gone. I haven't missed the dungeons. Let's put it that way. At least the ones I did. And it's like it's found its own path now, and it's done super, super well. And there's things that it makes me want to do for fun, which is the approach that needs to happen. It's the same way WoW's gone with Dragonflight, right? They've ditched their old style. Let's stop putting mandatory stuff in and go with it for fun, because there's so much choice out there to go for now. And I'm really surprised. I was super surprised. I thought Guild Wars 2, we were in and out. If I was to budget my time on stream, because we call it the list. We have a list of games we want to get to and play through and do all these kind of things. I probably would have given it a month. But I think we're like 2 months in now. We're not even halfway through. And I can't wait to do what's next.
Yeah.
Certainly... with the ugly ass Irene dragon. Like, I can't wait till we kill that thing. That's going to be so fun. Can't wait. I dream about it every night. Got the brother down. One more to go.
Well, yeah, I mean, who knows what the future holds? Yeah, I can say nothing. I can't say, my lips are sealed, right?
Irene's going down. Give me 2 minutes in that chamber. I'll get this fixed.
Goodness me. But yeah, the game, as kind of go back what we were talking about, the game has absolutely evolved over time. But you can still see that there are some parts of it that are like, okay, maybe they should have just borrowed that thing from WoW. Hey, look, WoW borrowed from Guild Wars 2. They took the sky scale, right?
They borrowed everything.
Yeah,
WoW was literally a buffet of every game that was out there.
Yeah, so we can borrow a few things back as well. We'll be pretty good, I think. And in some sense they have, right? Because one thing about raids, this is kind of like one of the pain points with raids actually, is that they kind of had a lot of story attached to them, which isn't abnormal, right? Of course. For content like this. But the issue was that it was pretty inaccessible, right? So what they've started to do now is that you'll have story bosses as strike missions, right? For example. And that means that they're kind of reusing that, so they're able to make them at the same time. For example, like right now, and prepare your Pepe laughs, right? Right now, we're looking. The plan for squad content, 10-player content, is 2 strike missions per expansion. So 2 strike missions per year, which is 2 bosses per year, right? Realistically, that's only possible because they have actually adapted their approach a little bit, and they have said, okay, if we make... Because this is the thing that they've had. They've gone, right, we're going to go all in on raids, and they weren't able to make any story. Then they were like, okay, that's kind of not a good idea. Let's go all in on story. And they were like, well, now we can't make anything else. We can't maintain PvP or World vs. World, and we can't make raids. So they've gone, what do we do? I don't know, right? And now they've finally come to the conclusion that, okay, we should probably add difficulty settings and reuse some of this content so it can serve multiple audiences, right? As much as we possibly can, right? That in a sentence is like the history of Guild Wars 2. Them going, we've tried this thing, it's not really working. Let's try something else.
How's the leadership changed a lot?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
Yes.
Because I watched the announcement trailer of Heart of Thorns, or I believe it might have been Path of Fire, actually. And everybody who came in, people were saying, has left the business now, in some ways.
Yeah. So, well, here's a fun one, actually, because you brought up Dungeons. The guy who made Dungeons, like he left like at the launch of the game, right? Pretty much. And yeah, that we've gone through a whole bunch of game directors over the years, right? For sure. And, it's funny, actually, we've almost kind of come full circle. One of the, I think, most iconic developers, actually, very, very famous for his physical presentation, his demeanor, right? Developer Colin Johansson. He's actually back at the company now. Left, when did he leave? Someone in the chat will tell me. I don't know my history, but left at some point during the game. Now he's back, right, as well. But, there was Mike O'Brien, of course, and, ex-WoW developer, of course. Mm-hmm. Actually was one of the founders of ArenaNet, even was game director for a good chunk of time. Then there was a guy called Mike Z, super cool guy, but unfortunately he has also gone the way of the dinosaurs. It's a game director graveyard here, yeah. I'm afraid, here in Guild Wars 2. Yeah, both Mikes gone. Unlucky, I guess.
So how long has Grouchy been in charge?
But I think more or less, as I understand it, Grouch started showing up at around Ender Dragons. We don't know exactly how long he was kind of at the helm, as it were, because obviously that there's some private stuff in there. But I think it was around like EOD. It was like November before the expansion came out or something like that. Something like that, right before Ender Dragons came out. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I'm taking notes here. This is important for what we do.
Yeah.
I'm sure Bex is as well, to understand this, because I'd like to talk to them about the development, because if you're right that there's a different leadership that's kind of pushed it in a different direction where the focus should be, because it's like when the new boss comes in, it's like, well, all our focus should be over here and all our focus should now be over here. We redirect this way to make it work. I mean, you just said 2 bosses a year.
Yeah.
Is that considered a lot?
Well, I mean, we have.
I'm trying to get my Guild Wars 2 scale.
So, I mean, yeah. So, I mean, this is funny. There are loads of memes about this, and this is interesting because ArenaNet actually said when they launched raids, there's a very infamous statement that their original plan for raids was 6 raid wings a year with 3 bosses ish. That was where they wanted to go.
That's reasonable, yeah.
Right? That's reasonable, right? But then
that's what you'd expect from other MMOs-ish.
That didn't really work out, as you may have noticed. And then raids kind of went to kind of every year, kind of, right? And then they went to
wing.
Every raid wing.
3 bosses.
Yes,
yeah.
Well,
there's 4 in wing 4.
Raid wing is almost a misnomer at this point. The original idea they had was that they were going to have a raid was going to be, say, 3 or 4 wings, right? That only happened for the first raid, the Forsaken Thicket, which is wings 1 through 3. All of the other ones are separate entities.
Oh.
Yeah, so they essentially change on that vision. People still do call them, wing 1, wing 2, wing 3, wing 4, wing 5, wing 6, wing 7, but that's almost like not what that word means in other MMOs, right? Like it's just raid, it's raid number X, right? Rather than raid wing as such. Yeah, that was their original idea. 2 bosses a year. Well, it's been a little while since the last raid. They do in general struggle with instance content, right? So we haven't had a fractal, I think, for like 2 years at this point, a dungeon for 2 years or so, something like that. Or well, it might not be 2 years, but it's a lot.
I've seen an offensive website, which is like a respell of fuck ArenaNet or something horrible like that.
Yeah, it's
but it does have the countdown. I think it's 1400 days or something since the last raid.
950 days since the last fractal, 1400 days since the last raid. It's it's a bit of a meme. That is a little bit.
I understand the
there is a strike
now.
mission, right? There's a strike. Yeah, no, we're just relaxing here, right? We're chilling out.
Now. One day,
one day we're gonna get some content. I mean, look, I think that we've come to the bedrock here. The problem with Guild Wars 2, the biggest issue that's always had, is that they struggle to release content for whatever reason, right? It's who knows, right? Exactly what's going on there. But in general, content releases are pretty slow. And it's one of the reasons why people were absolutely terrified of ArenaNet releasing Season 1 again, which I actually said is a good idea. Because honestly, imagine if Season 1 wasn't there. That would be so weird. You got all of Season 1 in like a scuffed cutscene. It's just, what the hell's going on? That's not good for new players, right? But people were like, no, Season 1, we're going to get no content for ages now. And that's
understandable as well.
Understandable, yeah, of course. And that kind of did come to fruition. The most recent patch that came out, people weren't super happy about it. But the real reason why people weren't super happy about it was because it took 1 year after the expansion launch to get it. For some kind of perspective, the story took less than an hour to play through. And it added a map. There was no dungeon or anything else outside of it. It was just like a story thing. It's got a map on it. There you go. And it was not very well received. But a big part of that was simply because it was a year since the release of the expansion. So players essentially had a bit of a content drought outside of the re-release of Season 1, which was obviously very bothersome. But yeah, like, content release schedule in Guild Wars 2 has always been a big issue, especially when it comes to managing other game modes, because almost I'm doing the other game modes a bit of a disservice here. PvP in World versus World, although, most MMOs don't focus on PvP, it's a thing, right? It's something that should be looked at. And in Guild Wars 2, actually, originally was very focused around PvP and even had esports, right? It was like really leaning into esports and stuff like that. These game modes were essentially abandoned, right? For a long time. One of the really funny things is that there's a bit of a rework for World versus World. It's being adjusted with the way it operates. And how long has... Oh yeah, that was announced. They announced that they were going to be reworking World versus World 1,907 days ago. And look, I want to preface this now, okay? Now I'm doing some safeguarding. I actually am a big Guild Wars 2 fan, right? Like I don't want to shit on the game and say, oh, look at these guys, what are they doing, right? Look, I really like the game. I am a Guild Wars 2 enjoyer. But yeah, this is obviously a bit of an issue, right? If they're having difficulty maintaining the game in this way and updating the game frequently to keep players engaged and, all that kind of stuff. It's made worse, of course, because their communication hasn't been great. So a lot of the time, players just kind of left there thinking, like, what the heck's going on, right? Like, help, ArenaNet, please give us something, which has led to a lot of, build-up in frustration.
I can get it. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. There's no, especially if it's your favorite game, right? That level of frustration is always heightened if it's your favorite game. I don't want to really play anything else, but I kind of feel forced to because you don't give me enough stuff. It totally makes sense why people would feel that way. And hopefully they get it resolved because, I saw the announcement of the 1 yearly cycle thing coming out, which people seemed pretty happy with, at least in my chat. Who were like, this is a good thing because at least they're telling us what the cycle is going to be. We can sort of prepare for it. We can expect things to happen rather than waiting for the day, refreshing the forum, waiting for the tweet to go out that something's happening and being left with nothing happening. So I don't know. I only saw these numbers recently because obviously I've come in with like a whole wealth of content in front of me. Like I've got stuff for days. And then the regular players like, you don't know what we've been through. You don't understand. You don't get it. We've been here for 2 years waiting for something. And I'm like, whoa, we got Path of Fire tomorrow. Let's go. Let's have some fun. But yeah, I get it. It's a rough time.
Yeah.
To be in that.
The game has been absolutely carried by, again, one of its strongest features is that, if you're new, you're going to go, what the hell are these idiots talking about? This is insane, right? Like, this is so much content. This is ridiculous. It's going to take me ages to get through all this stuff, right? Yeah. This is one of the features about the game that is incredibly powerful to it, is that everything stays relevant, like forever, right? It's always going to be there for you to enjoy at your own pace and your own time. And that's why there is a bit of that. It is a bit of a weird disconnect, right? Between players who go like, whoa, like, why are you guys complaining about this all the time? Like, you know, I'm a new player. This is crazy. It's very, it's an interesting dynamic that ends up playing out because, yeah, new players don't exactly have the context on how long you had to wait for some of this stuff to happen, which can be super painful. You know, there are groups that are like, I want to raid. Let's go. I'm raiding like crazy right now. And then over time, you just deflate a little bit, right? While you're waiting for the next thing to release, especially if you don't know when. Like, I think this is one thing that I really like about ArenaNet's new approach, and I very much find myself aligned with the current game director with where to take the game. Actually, a big part of that is they're really trying to set our expectations and say this is what you're going to get, and this is when you can expect it, right? Which has been very absent.
Very important.
Yeah,
it relaxes your player base. That's the important thing about communication like that.
Yeah.
Is it relaxes your players. They're not tense. They're not arguing about it. It's like, we told you what's going to happen. Okay, it's fine. Yeah. I know when Christmas is. I don't think about it. It's not bothersome, right? You know what I mean? It's one of those. It's like, if I can expect it, I'm happy. Yeah. I'm good. You're telling me it's coming out December 25th? Okay. Yeah. That's fine. I'm not going to be moaning about it in March or April. You know what I mean?
There's a fantastic example of this happening in Guild Wars 2. So there was a periods of the game history before End of Dragons that was a little bit rocky. A lot of layoffs were going on. Obviously sucks. And ArenaNet basically said, listen, guys, there's an expansion coming. It's going to be a little while, though. And there was essentially no content for a very long time. But you know what? Everyone was kind of soothed in a way, right? Because people knew it was coming, right? And they were like, oh, okay, right? Like, the panic was over in a way. Because people were obviously, when there's big layoffs, people are thinking like, holy shit, is this the end? Like, is it happening? Like, oh my God, right? And that was also a time when a game director also went. So double ouch, right? Like, holy shit. In fact, it was actually 2 game directors in quite quick succession, funnily enough. But yeah, big oof and a little bit spooky in that regard. But yeah, they just said, yep, it's happening, right? So sit tight and let's game. And they basically just put in a bunch of just, they gave away all of the living world for free. So if you logged in, you get it for free, basically. And just some like random activities like chopping trees and all the old maps. And actually, it was, funny enough, one of the more active periods of the game's history, because everyone's like, oh, wow, look, I can log in and do this. This is pretty hype, right? We're getting ready for the new expansion. Ooh, exciting. It worked really well. It was very effective with what happened.
One of the biggest surprises I've had with Guild Wars 2, even in the brief time we played, is how goofy they are. Like, there's such a strong goofy side to them. The big head mode in an MMO, I was gobsmacked by that. I was like, really? We're doing big head mode in an MMO, and I couldn't get rid of it. It was funny, but also annoying. And then there was the Super Adventure Box. Weird and wonderful and totally
incredible.
Okay.
I
really
think,
fun.
Yeah, Super Adventure Box I think is so remarkable, and that was kind of thrown together by just a couple of devs who almost kind of did it as like a meme, right? That's the funny thing about it as well, is that there's a lot of story behind how that even came to fruition. And yeah, it's one of those things that about Guild Wars 2. One of the things that I look for in games in general is, and what I value in games is things that just didn't have to be there. Right, they didn't have to do that, but they did it anyway, right? Because it was fun and it was interesting. And I think there's a good chunk of stuff in Guild Wars 2 that is like that. It's some of those things that I really appreciate about video games in general is when the devs do something for fun, right? Like they went above and beyond to make something really exciting. Like those are the very special moments I think in games. And
in MMOs especially, if you can stop being so serious about your game.
Yeah.
And remember, it's a video game, then you're going to have a good time. And you're going to be able to do things. Like, you know, there's definitely some games out there who, like, won't make certain really fun mounts because they might break immersion. And then you've got flying pigs in Guild Wars 2 and giant jelly beans. And you've got people, riding mechanical cars in Final Fantasy, even though no one else has a car. You know, things like that, like going out of your way to remember it's a video game. And people are like, yeah, but it ruins the immersion. I said, dude, do you know that in Doom 2 and Castle Wolfenstein versus the Nazis, you could open a door that took you to a place made of fairy cakes and things, right? It's existed since time began of video games. No matter how serious they are and how bloody and gutsy they are, they always had something silly in there because it's a video game at the end of the day, and nobody cares about whether or not your mount fits the immersion or anything like that. Nobody cares.
And you know, funnily enough, this is actually, I think, a big frustration with the game's communication, is that the way the devs communicate, or no, I shouldn't say the devs, the way the studio communicates sometimes is the opposite of that, right? Whenever you meet the devs, or whenever you see them on camera, it's obvious that they're goofballs, right? They love it, right? They're having fun, right? They're having such a good time, and they're so excited to share what they're making with the players, right? And that's awesome to see, right? And that's, you know, that's reflected in you know, in the higher level developers too, right? Like in the game directors, right? Like the communication you get when you see them, it's awesome. It's really refreshing. And yeah, it's not super serious, which I mean that in the best possible way, of course, right? It's awesome. Yeah, actually, in particular, there's some incredibly well-loved devs who are in charge of balance right now. Cal Cohen, also known as CMC, and Roy, he's called Roy. And they're just so funny, right? They're just funny, right? When they're talking about the game modes, and they know all the memes, you know, they know all the memes about balance, right? They're really in tune with it. They're having a great time. They're joking around. It's awesome. But historically, ArenaNet is presented, to be frank, in a very wooden way, to an extent, like that doesn't build that rapport with the community as well as they could have done, because they have a really vibrant dev team that very clearly loves the game, but regrettably, we don't always see that and haven't historically seen that, which I definitely think is a bit of a detriment. It sounds like a minor thing, but I really think that the relationship that the studio has with the community is incredibly important, right? You have to have that trust between the two parties in order for the community to function.
No, I'd like to get involved with that, because that's exactly why we went and saw Blizzard recently, is they always do these like Hollywood produced announcement trailers. It's like, who are you talking to? Like, you're game devs. We know what you're like. You come in sandals and t-shirt every day of the week, and now you've put on a suit and tie to tell us about the latest expansion or whatever. It makes no sense. Like, why have you got these like lens flares to go around the table and all this kind of stuff? Like, I always said it reminded me of the Nintendo Switch adverts, where apparently we're all stood on rooftops in Manhattan doing barbecues and playing Mario Kart. You know, that average every day that the gamers do. It's like, who is this advertising to at all? This is such nonsense. But I'm glad to hear that about them, and I'll have to check some of the interviews with the ArenaNet devs so I know who was responsible for a lot of this stuff. Because one of the coolest things I've seen is actually some of the devs coming into the game while I'm playing, and even wanting to join into the raid with us. And I'm really sorry, I had to say no because we wanted blind raiders, and definitely the devs are not going into the raid blind. So they're like, do you really want? Is it blind only? And I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Although I desperately do want to play with some of the devs, but it's great to see that they're out there having fun. Yeah, Darkbringer was there riding around on his throne, as a lot of our viewers turned up in giant pink mustaches and made outfits to surround him. But that's some of the stuff you just don't see enough of, is the devs being around in game. Real people who are gaming and goofing around.
Yeah.
Like that's something that I didn't expect to see with Guild Wars 2. And I didn't even notice it at first. It was the chat that told me. It's like, hey, one of the devs is there. And I'm like, what? Oh, hello. There you are. Can I have less loot? Because that's all I want out of Guild Wars, please. Please stop filling my bags with bags within bags within bags within bags. I would love that very much. But that's so awesome to see the devs being an active part of the community. It's the same with the PoE guys. You know, they use the Q streamers and stuff to access the community and do all that kind of stuff. It's awesome. It's so good. Nothing about Guild Wars 2 hasn't been a pleasant surprise. That's why I think people who play MMOs and ignoring it, like I did, because I'm guilty of it, right? It's the people who are like me that I'm talking to, who looked at it and went, WoW clone, moved on with their lives, and just ignored it. And it's like, if you're like me and you've not played it, you have got years and years worth of content to come there, and we don't have to suffer through the content droughts. And if you do, unlucky. Unlucky.
Yeah.
You're going to end up in the bathrobe with the beard.
Yeah, I'm afraid
Waiting
so.
for that patch day.
It is the fate that awaits you. It is, I'm afraid. So watch out, unless you're not like me. But I mean, I really do hope. I mean, like, I'm gonna get mocked for this. I don't even want to say this, right? But with any luck, I do hope that their a new approach to the game will actually really help them solve some of these issues. Right? It's not going to be perfect. I'm not expecting as many raids as World of Warcraft. Right? I'm not expecting that. That's a ridiculous expectation, right? But I think if it can become consistent and reliable, I think that's an awesome step forward, actually. And some of the approaches that they have now is very, very satisfying. I think in particular with the strike missions, yeah, they're not as massive and immersive as a raid, right? Of course, right? They're, just single boss encounters, all that kind of good stuff. But you know what? I would really challenge people in the fact that I think they're very satisfying in a way that raids kind of aren't. A lot of them, obviously, like very sweaty veterans, they find raids too easy. Right? Because, the whole difficulty thing, it's like really hard for them to make super hard content that basically nobody can beat. And they only have 2 difficulty options, which is a bit difficult to fit it in. With strikes, they kind of went crazy, right? They really went for it. And I think they will continue to do that. So I think in a lot of ways, some of the new ideas that we've already seen so far are actually improving the game and can definitely make it appeal to a lot of the players who are in the game, while also being appealing to players who aren't as sweaty or newer to the game as well. And I was going to say, I don't want to get memed, because one of the things that Guild Wars 2 has said a lot, and this is because of their different changes in direction, I think they've said, we are reworking our direction so that we can release content in a more timely manner, like 5 times over the history of the game, right? So at this point, ArenaNet's in a really tough spot. Like when they say something like, yeah, we've got all these great new ideas, these new approaches, people just go like, yeah, I've heard that before, right? So they very much need to deliver on this, right? Like ArenaNet, it's an important time. You've arrived at an important time in the game's history, even this late into the day, right? Can they finally nail it this time? Let's find out, I guess.
I hope so. I've got Path of Fire tomorrow. We're finishing the story out, and then I guess the raid from there. But I'm keeping blind on what content awaits me as well, because I like the surprise of whether there's strikes that come with Path of Fire. I don't know. I got a strike at the end of Living World Season 1, but that's the only strike I've done so far. But certainly in terms of their developments, and now you've said that it's the hardest stuff. Oh, one of the harder raids is coming up. I'll have to prepare the team in some way to get there. And hopefully no mastery grinds, although the mastery grind wasn't that bad for the Zero fight. I had to get Leyline, which was the only time it's asked me to do that, was to grind a level 5.
Do you want to know?
I'll find out when I get there.
Okay.
I'm sure I'll find out as to whether they did that again. But yeah, that's the plan going forward. I have a long way to go before End of Dragons. But so far, it's only been getting better and better.
Yeah.
So
I'm very curious, like how far do you plan on going? Because of course, you're not going to be able to dedicate, thousands of hours to each MMO because you're covering so many, of course. But would you actually be interested in kind of going for the hardest fight in the game, for example? Like how far are you planning on going in each of these different projects that you're working on?
It depends on the game and if I like it or not. Like it really, like with Guild Wars 2, I'm very much leaning towards doing the challenge modes because that's super fun. But we're also, like you said, we are simultaneously going to be doing the Savage raids in FF14. Inevitably, people want... I'm not sure whether we'll do this on stream, because the last thing I actually want to do is turn the stream into a raid stream, because I can't talk to chat when we're doing it blind.
Yeah.
I can't do that. And that's not particularly a fun streaming experience in general. Some people really like it, but once you kind of learnt the mechanics and you've solved the puzzle, it comes to execution, it becomes a bit of a drag, right? Because you're like just waiting for everybody to get it right, and you'll check back in every now and again. It's not a particularly fun stream. So I'm trying to balance it in that way, which is why I'm jumping around a lot. So we did a lot of raiding for Heart of Thorns to finish that up, which is then we jumped over to Destiny 2 to do some story, which wasn't particularly great. So then we came back to Path of Fire, and then we've got 2 new patches for WoW. The big patch for WoW 10.1. Hopefully I'll be involved for the Race to World first for that, which means I might have some traveling to do. And the same with FF14 has got another massive patch coming. So I'm jumping around so we're not just a raid stream, because that's going to get old really, really fast. My current intention, though, is to do everything in Guild Wars 2. As I feel about the game right now, I can't wait for the next thing. I'm excited to stream tomorrow for Path of Fire. I'm excited to get a boat at some point so I can stop being made fun of for not having a boat. I can't swim in any body of water in that game without everybody showing up and putting boats next to me and being smug about it. I don't actually care for the flying mount. Like, nothing I've seen seems positive about the flying mount. Hopefully it'll make sense when I get there. Because I'm in a non-flying mount world, everything just looks like it's getting trivialized by flying mounts. Like getting the mastery points, vistas, all that kind of stuff. Mordramoth, as another example, is like, oh, we're just flying there, or not learning the terrain or whatever. So
yeah. One
I'll
flying
see
mount,
how that plays out.
One flying mount is kind of OP and a bit boring. The other one is a hell of a lot of fun.
Is it a dragon?
That is all I will say.
I've heard something about good dragon riding in Guild Wars too.
Yeah, certainly some component. I'm avoiding the spoilers, of course. But yes,
well, I have played Dragonflight. So.
Yeah, certainly some big elements of kind of like the acrobatic element of dragon riding, right? Is in Guild Wars 2, and it's a hell of a lot of fun to use actually, and it's less game breaky than just like fly hacking around, if that makes any sense, right? It's more of almost like a racing mini game, it like built into the game, which is very cool.
Not like that horrible one in Amanoon that I got disqualified from.
Oh wait.
The game lied. That was an absolute scam and a travesty. It actually called the whole game into question for its legitimacy. It was a real. I didn't jump the start. We checked the tapes. I did not jump the start. That was just an absolute lie. We checked the tapes. So
yeah,
we'll see. But
there's some exciting things. There's a lot of the mounts in Guild Wars 2, that kind of like the ones after the core ones, they're almost built into their own game of their own, right? There's almost like a racing mount, right? Like that's very dedicated for really going fast, right? And there's even like race tracks and all that kind of stuff.
The Beetle? I have done the Beetle. I've done the Beetle I've rented a Beetle.
Yeah, that one is super fun. I think, particularly when there's a lot of there's a huge amount of like mechanic stuff you can do and loads of tech that you can learn to really like optimize it and go insanely fast. There are some people who are ridiculously good at it. Some people even play it that's their gameplay, right? They just they want to play the racing game within Guild Wars 2. It's very fun stuff for sure.
Yeah, I kind of got hooked on adventures because every expansion so far has brought with it a new system. I haven't checked out bounties yet. That's part of my plan for tomorrow, is to see how the bounty system works, because the warning that the legendary bounties do require groups and stuff like that. So I'm kind of curious, because again, the grand scale of a lot of the encounters in Guild Wars has me intrigued to try them all out. It's one of the reasons I kind of jump into the orange quests that are just random, because it's like this probably leads to some sort of gargantuan boss battle. So I'm hoping bounties go that way. I'm going to try them out tomorrow and see what goes on with that. But at the same time, every meta event, the adventures, I got hard engaged in the adventures to gold medal them all. I've give up on that now. Some of them are really long. They're like 10 minutes long.
Yeah.
Which is a big investment to try and redo to get the gold medals on. But yeah, they're hit and miss with mini games, as it always is going to be with mini games. I did do them all in Heart of Thorns, which was an adventure because I didn't have the masteries. But I did them.
Yeah, some of them are pretty questionable. I think the scrap rifle, right? That one is not the best.
That one bugs out. It's so horrible.
not the best one.
So horrible. It's so bad. I was peppering the target. It just was not going down. I was like, oh my god, kill me.
I think that actually the adventures was one of the things that I was the most surprised about that you really liked, because that type of adventure, the Heart of Thorns style, honestly wasn't that popular. As is my understanding of it anyway. It's and that's kind of like I think why they moved away from it. So it was very interesting. I think quite a lot of people were surprised by that, because personally, I'm with you. I think they're really cool. I'm a big fan of Fungus Among Us.
I wouldn't farm them,
right?
I would not farm them.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
They're getting the gold once. Right? I'm a big fan. Yeah. Like beating it and calling it good. Sure, I'm done. But some of them were such a mess, and they were so awkward and buggy. Like the roller one, where you had to jump over ledges and things and not go in water.
Yep.
That one was horrible. That was actually horrible to do, especially because I didn't have the speed up mushroom, so I had to min-max the hell out of it. And yeah, that was like a slight stone sticking out of the floor was like, and you stopped, and now you got to start again and do all that. That was horrendous. Like each of them had their own weird flaws. Yeah, it was fun. The fungus one is, I think, is one of the ones I didn't gold medal because you needed the speed mastery. I think.
Yeah,
Is that the one where you had to knock them down and then you pick them up in like the? I think it was right. You had to knock off. You had to get something and then pick it up.
I think the fungus among us. That's the one that you were just talking about just then. It's when you turn into a mushroom and you have to go through the water with a speed boost.
Oh, is that one?
Yeah, that's
okay.
that one.
I got the gold medal. On
Yeah.
There was another. The only one I didn't gold medal was a big open room.
Yeah, with mushrooms, right? And you had to jump on the mushrooms. Yeah. That one. That one's actually pretty tight in terms of the pathing that you have to take. Yeah, that one's it's an intense one. The floor is lava, I think, is what it's called.
Yeah, floor is lava. Yeah, that one felt like it needed the speed mushroom. It was the only one I did where it's like you kind of need this mastery to do it. That's how I felt about it, so I left it there.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. They really, with Heart of Thorns, the mastery is there. They really want it to be a bit, kind of Metroidvania, right? Where it's like, oh, okay, well, I've got to come back here. I've got to go get this, then I've got to come back, and then I can do this later on, right? This is going to unlock that, right? That was the approach they wanted to go with. They wanted to make it very dangerous, right? They wanted everyone to get eaten alive by the pocket raptors while you're going through. Get lost in tangled depths, right? That's a big one. It's enjoy that.
God. Awful. People who defend tangled depths are just completely brainwashed.
I'm a tangled depths fan. I admit it.
Exactly. You're brainwashed.
I love it.
Actually brainwashed. It's
epic.
Awful. It's disgusting. It's awful. It's so bad. Oh God. I've never encountered a zone like that in any MMO. Any would be so bold as to make it. And it's one of those that if you play enough so you know your way around it, you've gone too far. You should get out as quickly as possible.
Absolutely.
You don't want to be somebody who's learnt that map.
Yeah.
You don't want that. Because then you become so elitist and so smug about it.
You can't navigate
Tangled Depths is easy.
It's time to get good. It's time to learn. Yeah.
What is it, 5 different vertical levels to that one?
Oh, yeah. It's a good one.
I think it's 5.
Oh, man. Yeah. I have to say I do kind of like that sort of thing. But I think, do you have any other final points? Do you think we've missed anything that we wanted to... We have a burning desire to speak about here? Anything I didn't ask you? Or anything you didn't ask me?
It was Boons and Raid setup I really wanted to talk to you about.
Yeah.
Get your input on that. But I think a good revisit in the future, probably after the raids are cleared, would be a good check. And check after we've checked some of the strikes out.
Yeah.
Because then we could be a bit more open without you having to be like, you'll see. It's all coming home. But no, I think that's a good point to end it there.
Awesome.
And revisit in the future.
Okay. In that case, let's wrap things up a little bit here. So if you have any kind of shout outs you want to make, tell us where we can watch your epic journey through the world of Guild Wars 2, or any other kind of final comments, and we'll wrap things up. Right.
We're streaming tomorrow morning, 8:30 a.m. Twitch TV, Preach LFW, and we are somewhat through Path of Fire. I have 2 mounts, is where we're up to, including a bunny rabbit, which I'm definitely not going to swipe to change the skin on to a cute panda. I am not going to do that.
Are you sure about that? Yeah,
I'm not sure about that at all.
Well, I mean, yeah.
I am promised something that can go over water is coming my way soon, so I can no longer be a boatless poor. But our goal right now for the rest of the next week till Friday is to finish Path of Fire and get into Wing 5, which is that's our current target as where we're going to be, which apparently is going to be very hard. So if you want to join that, and we are doing it blind, so none of us know what's in there, and we don't know what the bosses do. We don't know what it looks like, and we'll do it in our own way with bad DPS and poor boon uptime. Which is what we're going to do.
Okay, very much looking forward to that. And of course, definitely check that out. If you type !hosts, it will link all of that good stuff there. Twitch, YouTube, Twitter. Go check that out. It'll be below the stream, and of course on YouTube as well. Or, you could just use the internet as well. That you can do that too. And the shout out thing. Click the shout out thing as well. And of course, if you enjoyed the stream, you should probably follow it. Okay, I stream a lot of Guild Wars 2, right? I've streamed so much Guild Wars 2 that, well, look, I've ended up like this, right? I've ended up with the dressing gown and the beard. So, look, join me in my beardedness, I guess, or something. And come back and watch every single day. Watch all the other TeaTimes and let us know what you think in the comment section as well. Give us your feedback. Give us your ideas. And I'm sure we will see you all next time. So, once again, thank you so much for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you joining us on the show. And, of course, epic to watch. A lot of new players having the Guild Wars 2 experience. Very much looking forward to it. And of course, thank you very much for watching, everyone. That is it for now. Take it easy, my friends.
Bye, everybody.
We'll see you next time.